Are you struggling with minorities? Are you constantly having to deal with the others in your neighborhood? Did you move out to the suburbs and hope that everybody would look like you and also have the same thoughts and prayers as you? Are you finding that there are some people that just need to be helped, that need to be saved from themselves? Come to the American Redoubt. There's a future for you, right here in the American Redoubt, right past the border of Canada and right past the border of Washington. Come to the American Redoubt. Enjoy the vistas. Enjoy the lack of diversity. Enjoy the oppression. It's yours to wield as you wish in the Redoubt. For far too long, we've watched these beautiful visions of patriotism being snuffed out by windmills. These treacherous windmills ruthlessly taking the life of these majestic patriots. How could we stand by and let all this happen? We needed to do something. A change had to come. Luckily, a man showed up. A man showed up and saved the Eagles. And that man's name was Donald J. Trump. In 2016, the savior of this symbol of America came. And all of a sudden, the eagle population was on the rise again. Never in the history of the world has anybody ever seen such population growth. This man truly was sent by a higher power to grow this population of American symbolism, to bring all of these like-minded, white-headed eagles together, to grow when they were once shrinking. These white-headed patriots found themselves flourishing with this guy. Fucking hilarious. Do you find yourself attracted to somebody that looks a lot like you? That goes to the bathroom in the same place you do? That maybe plays on the same sports team? Are you strangely attracted to the other men in the locker room? If so, come on down to the evangelical church, where we will help you. We're here to help you take those attractions away. We just want to help save you from eternal damnation and hellfire with Toby. We understand how hard it must be thinking that you're attracted to somebody on your team. Come down to the evangelical church. We're just one conversion therapy away from freedom.
Well, Republicans seem to support one fellow, America's new dad, some guy named Brandon. He's having a really good year. America's new dad, some guy named Brandon. He's having a really good year, and I'm kind of happy for him. Why in the hell are we still doing this? There's one reason why it's great to be here again. The party's too extreme, too divisive, too controlled by one person. They say that's not your father's Republican Party. Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down. Today's Republicans say, tear down Mickey Mouse's house, Mickey Mouse's house. Why in the hell are we still doing this? The Republicans seem to support one fella. And pretty soon they'll be storming Cinderella's castle, you can be sure of it. The party's too extreme, too divisive. Tonight, we come here to answer a very important question in everybody's mind. The Republicans seem to support one fella, America's new dad, some guy named Brandon. America's new dad. Why in the hell are we still doing this? America's new dad. And I'm kind of happy for him. Another question about whether we should gather here tonight because of COVID. Well, we're here to show the country that America's new dad, some guy named Brandon, he's having a really good year. Why in the hell are we still doing this?
For far too long, we've allowed the vicious heteros to indoctrinate our children and endanger the safety of our loved ones. We've allowed this to go on at a pace that is accelerating. It's time that we ban Beauty and the Beast, because that is a man and a woman trying to set the stage that all relationships must be like this. It's time we stand up against this princess and this prince fantasy. It's time to end. We must ban all these Disney movies like Lion King, where it was a male and a female. We must ban Nemo because it was a mother and a father. This endless hetero indoctrination must come to an end. Oh, this country is in trouble.
Somehow.
Are you struggling with minorities? Are you constantly having to deal with the others in your neighborhood? Did you move out to the suburbs and hope that everybody would look like you and also have the same thoughts and prayers as you? Are you finding that there are some people that just need to be helped, that need to be saved from themselves? Come to the American Redoubt. There's a future for you, right here in the American Redoubt, right past the border of Canada and right past the border of Washington. Come to the American Redoubt. Enjoy the vistas. Enjoy the lack of diversity. Enjoy the oppression. It's yours to wield as you wish in the Redoubt. For far too long, we've watched these beautiful visions of patriotism being snuffed out by windmills. These treacherous treacherous windmills, ruthlessly taking the life of these majestic patriots. How could we stand by and let all this happen? We needed to do something. A change had to come. Luckily, a man showed up. A man showed up and saved the Eagles. And that man's name was Donald J. Trump. In 2016, the savior of this symbol of America came. And all of a sudden, the eagle population was on the rise again. Never in the history of the world has anybody ever seen such population growth. This man truly was sent by a higher power to grow this population of American symbolism, to bring all of these like-minded, white-headed eagles together, to grow when they were once shrinking. These white-headed patriots found themselves flourishing with this guy. Fucking hilarious. Do you find yourself attracted to somebody that looks a lot like you? That goes to the bathroom in the same place you do? That maybe plays on the same sports team? Are you strangely attracted to the other men in the locker room? God, I hate this software. My face is exploding. I don't know what's going on. But we're here. What up, Tail Gunner? What up, Mulder? Or I'm on probation. What up, Aiken or Rumble? And One Solved Mystery about 5 days ago said, I hope you will touch on the David Cooper confession. I hope you will touch on the David Cooper, aka Darrell Kirkwood confessions. P.S. There's more than one DK of Indiana. So we will look at that. But we have an interesting day set up for Ramsey stuff. We are gonna go through one of my favorite interviews. We're going to go back and look at Karen Arndt, the crazy-eyed Jodie Foster, Agent Starling, but maybe more like special ed Agent Starling is my thought on Karen Arndt. She was the detective that was there when the body was found, and the police have a certain spin on everything. But we're going to look at, after we look at that, we're going to look at a kind of an overview video that I know I've watched, which is why it's on my list. But I don't. Hey, what up, Corny or April? Everybody has a different name here. It's so funny. God, my face looks terrible. I'm just gonna sit like this all day. Like when my tooth was missing and I sat like this, I'm gonna sit like this all day. God damn, look at that. It's gonna say hi to you guys pretty soon. Can you hear it? Is it talking? So we'll go through that. We're gonna go into a video with Katie Couric and Lou Smith, the detective that went and worked for Boulder and then was let go because he thought an intruder did it and that wasn't okay. April Fool. And then we've got some stuff about eyewitnesses that I've never heard before. The David Cooper video that I mentioned that this One Solved Mystery mentioned. And then also from One Solved Mystery, there's a number of videos that are out and there's more coming out that says the final suspects. So we'll go through that. We're focused primarily on, God damn, even the green screen's fucked now. Oh wait, I might know why that is. Which side is that? Nope, that makes no sense. All right, I'll try to work on, I might be able to fix that by just moving it. It's your month. That's funny. So we'll get started and get into this. Normally on Twitters, we would do a bunch of memes and some fun stuff first, but I just want to get into it here and that'll make more sense. So the first one we're going to watch is I Know Who Killed JonBenet. And like I said, this is Crazy Eye Detective Clarice Starling, a.k.a. Linda Arndt. All right, give me 1 second.
Hello, I'm Christine Klein in New York, and welcome to a special edition of Time Tunnel. With the JonBenet Ramsey murder back in the headlines, today we travel back to 1999, 3 years after the 6-year-old was strangled. ABC's Elizabeth Vargas talked with Linda Arndt, the Colorado detective who first handled the case, and she had her own suspicions about who the killer was.
How was everybody's zombie day? I enjoyed stream yesterday.
Oh, hello.
Nearly 3 years after the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, the case remains unsolved. But the detective who first handled the case has no questions about who is guilty.
I know who killed JonBenet. There's no doubt in my mind who killed JonBenet. And until...
Oh, wait, we're in the wrong room.
While this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out loud.
Linda Arndt was the first detective on the scene at the Ramsey house on December 26, 1996, the morning John and Patsy Ramsey had reported their 6-year-old daughter JonBenet missing.
There we go.
Arndt was the only officer there for much of the day. She later would be roundly criticized, vilified in the press as responsible for a bungled investigation.
Yeah. One thing that drives me nuts about this case is every single thing that the police claim the parents looked suspicious because they moved the body, but the police moved the body. It looks suspicious that he found the body. It looks more suspicious that the police didn't find the body. Like she shouldn't have touched the ransom note. You shouldn't have touched the ransom note. How could there be no fingerprints on it if she was holding it? Like, there's so many different little things that make me furious about this stuff.
Now she's speaking out to set the record straight, telling her side of that dramatic day 3 years ago. It all began with a call at 6:30 in the morning from her sergeant.
He said there's been a kidnapping. It involves a 6-year-old girl. There was a ransom note, a 2.5-page ransom note. And according to the ransom note, there was going to be a phone call from the author, and they were supposed to call between 8 and 10 a.m. So I was supposed to get to the house for purposes of monitoring the phone call.
8:10 a.m. Arndt arrived at the Ramsey home and meets John Ramsey for the first time.
How did he strike you?
Cordial.
With his fist.
Cordial? Mm-hmm. Upset?
Cordial.
Cordial.
What?
Cordial.
Cordial.
Did it strike you at all that that was behavior that was unusual for somebody whose child was just kidnapped?
Wait, okay,
It's been my
wait.
experience that people respond to trauma in different ways. So
That was the only murder in Boulder that year. And I don't know how many kidnappings, but I don't think these people have enough frame of experience to say he wasn't acting the way that he should. What, based on TV? Not based on your experience, because you have no experience in this at all. How many kids were kidnapped or murdered while you were a detective?
if someone has
And she's showing a lot of shoulders, don't you think, this little harlot? I'm just kidding.
a response that is different from mine, I don't put judgment to it.
Yes, you do.
I'll just note it.
You know,
And that is what she says she did all morning.
I don't put judgment to it until later in this interview.
Make mental notes of
I
all
hate
things
this bitch.
curious, including, she says, the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey remained apart in separate rooms for most of the day. That at one point, she says John Ramsey took time out in the middle of the crisis to read his mail.
I remember seeing John in the kitchen, looking through his mail, and I made a note that he was looking at his mail, and then I wondered, where did your mail come from?
How come you weren't just sitting quietly, crisscross applesauce in the corner? How come you weren't freaking out? But also, how come you weren't more calm? How come you were looking in your mail? Well, how come you didn't look in his mail? Did you go to his mailbox? Did you check to see if there was more information from a kidnapper? No? Oh, okay.
Isn't it possible maybe he was opening the mail looking for a clue from the kidnapper?
No way.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Chilling
Oops,
discovery.
shit.
Strike you at all that that was behavior?
That he was looking at his mail, and then I wondered, where did your mail come from?
Mailbox.
Isn't it possible
Post
maybe
office.
he was opening the mail looking for a clue from the kidnapper?
I don't know. And I don't speculate.
Oh my God. I thought it was strange. He was looking at his mail. Couldn't he have been doing this? I mean, I don't speculate. I don't judge people based on their behavior, but also based on his behavior, I knew something was wrong.
It's
Or
a
those
piece of
knees.
information that I see.
That's
It's
funny.
something that I note.
That's funny.
You thought it was unusual, however.
I can say that it stuck out.
10 a.m.
I don't judge, but I can sure say I did find it judge-worthy.
Line imposed by the writer of the ransom note for a telephone call.
John Ramsey has said, it said we're going to call tomorrow, and he didn't think that meant they would be calling today.
10 o'clock comes and goes,
Which
and
makes sense to me because I'm the one that was like, wait a minute, it says tomorrow.
there's no acknowledgement within the House from anyone that the deadline imposed by the author of the ransom note has come and gone.
Nobody said it's 10 o'clock and the kidnappers haven't called?
Nobody said that.
Not any
Was
of
that
the cops
something else
then.
you took note of?
Absolutely.
So none of the cops said anything about the time passing. But since the Ramseys didn't, that was kind of a clue. All the cops left at 10:30, but the Ramseys were still there. Well, did you tell them to leave? No.
By 10:30 in the morning, Arndt was the only police officer in the house with John and Patsy Ramsey.
Yeah, Mulder, I'm confused about the money because when John says it, he called somebody from like Amex to make it available. But I've heard the police say they arranged for the cash just in case. But I don't know that that's true. I counted my bullets. Exactly. I don't judge, but without any word, I counted my bullets to make sure we were alive.
Their pastor and four
I got to admit, the more I watch this, the less angry and the more like this bitch is retarded I get.
family friends. As they waited for news, the tension was mounting. Arndt called her station house for backup
God, look at my
repeatedly,
face.
but none had arrived.
How many times did you call the police department asking where your backup was and what was going on?
Well, I remember at least 2 calls. Both times I was told everybody.
I find it super suspicious of the Ramseys that I tried to get a hold of my supervisor for over an hour and they told me to fuck off. I don't know why the Ramseys would do that, though. I found it strange that the police didn't really search the house, didn't quarantine it off, didn't fucking make it a crime scene. They were told it was a kidnapping, but they showed up in a fucking logoed car out in front of the house. And I can't believe the Ramseys did all that.
Everybody's in a meeting. They got your message, and that was it.
Were you feeling pressure being in charge of a group this large?
Wait, what? Fernie set it up with a local branch and picked up the money? Do you have anything for that?
And with anxiety that high?
I felt tremendous pressure.
1:01 p.m. Although the house had
YouTube stats are having a lot of trouble. It says there's 9 concurrent viewers, but we've only had 1 viewer total.
already been searched by patrolmen before she arrived, Arndt says that in order to break the building tension, she asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again, top to bottom.
So how suspicious can it be that John Ramsey found something in the house that the cop said, hey, I'm suspicious of you. Why don't you go out and search the house? Go search the house, please.
Looking for anything out of place. She says she gave them specific instructions not to touch anything. She says John Ramsey headed straight to the basement. She heard Fleet White scream for an ambulance, and then a chilling discovery. For Arndt, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place.
And I see John Ramsey carrying JonBenet up the last 3 steps.
Which is my fault and my cop's fault for not finding the body that was in the house. I mean, we're cops, but like, what do you expect us to do? Search the house for a missing girl? There was a ransom, though. Why would we look around the house for the girl? No wonder they blamed the family.
From the basement.
Yes, Corny, that is right. Hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And take the little button that says share, click it, and go post it in Discords in your social.
And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense.
So I didn't judge him for his behavior. I didn't judge him for looking at his mail. I didn't judge him for being the one that actually found the body when the cops were too inept to do it themselves. I didn't judge him for any of that. And by not judging him, without judging him,
and everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense.
I literally spit
And
my coffee.
JonBenet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put JonBenet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face.
Why? Why did you lean down next to her face, bitch? Why? Why did you do that?
And John leaned down opposite
And did exactly the same thing I did. John did the same thing I just did.
me. And his face was just inches from mine.
As opposed to really far away while we're both kneeling down looking at his dead daughter.
And we had a nonverbal exchange.
I don't judge people's behavior, but this one nonverbal exchange that I don't judge made me realize all the things that I wasn't judging earlier are proof that he killed his daughter.
That I will never forget.
He said, is she dead?
And he asked if she was dead.
How dare the father of a dead 6-year-old child ask for confirmation that this thing that he's looking at is real? that this isn't some sort of dream, that he's not like, is she dead? And I knew immediately.
And I said, yes, she's dead.
And
And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911.
I, the cop, instructed the father to call 911. Maybe because my own superiors and my cohorts were ignoring me. They weren't just here. They literally were ignoring me.
And
You didn't judge somebody by the quality of their character. What a meatbag.
as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right
This is so stupid.
next to me, and
Imagine how bad of a cop or detective you have to be if you need to like visually count the bullets in your weapons because what, you don't already know them?
consciously counting, I've got 18 gun right next to me, and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I'm
Because I
lying.
didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up.
So
I
you
said it.
didn't judge him for his behavior. But I also was glad I had my gun because he was a threat to my safety at that point.
Everything made sense in that instance.
All the things I didn't judge.
And
Use the whisper fundy voice.
I knew what happened.
I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was well founded?
You bet I do.
Why? Because he's attacked and beat up so many other people? You bet I believe my fucking fear of John Ramsey was real.
There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day.
No doubt in my mind he'd have killed me. If I didn't count the bullets in my gun while weirdly tucking my gun in, if I didn't do that, then we would all be dead and nobody would be talking right now.
Okay.
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
So
Absolutely.
I just want to remind you how this started with her.
There's no questions about who.
No doubt. Find who killed JonBenet. Investigation is still ongoing. I don't think it's appropriate that I say that. While this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out loud. Investigation is still ongoing. I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out. While this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out loud.
Linda Arndt.
Living room. He's already put the blanket on top of her.
Arndt would later be harshly criticized.
And he says, could you please into the living room?
Afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house. Okay.
Never wavered. I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was
It's inappropriate with an ongoing investigation for me to claim who killed JonBenet. But when John Ramsey knelt down across from me, I knew immediately he was the killer. Like, in one interview, she can't stick to her story. It's an open investigation. It is inappropriate for me to say who did it. But I've known unequivocally John killed his daughter, JonBenet Ramsey. I knew it. I knew it so much, I counted the bullets. But also, it would be completely inappropriate for me to do exactly what I'm doing right now. Why do I keep doing this to you?
well founded?
Don't make me play the guy from Patrick Bet David.
You bet I do. There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day.
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I knew before 2 p.m. on the day of the investigation, without any evidence, all based on my feelings, I knew that he killed her. And so there was no reason for the police or the detectives or anybody else to actually follow any other leads. Yeah, Vinny. Yeah, that guy. The guy that this was said to.
You are a 5-star whack job. Yeah.
You are a 5-star whack job. He was that's when he was saying that January 6th was peaceful protest.
1:10 p.m., Detective Arndt moved JonBenet's body from...
I knew he did it, which is why I picked up and contaminated the body. It is amazing how many things the police did wrong that nobody calls them out for.
the hallway to the living room.
John Ramsey came.
Like, it was wrong that John Ramsey moved and touched the body. So what did I do as a detective that knows that? I know enough of Vinny's. That's funny. What I keep saying that. John ruined the evidence. And so I decided I would add to ruining it.
Came back.
He reminded me of my ex.
He
That's
grabbed
good.
a throw that was on the back of a chair. And he says, could you please cover her body? And as he's saying it, he's already put the blanket on top of her.
Which is obviously suspicious. I mean, how could you not assume the dad did it? Because he was obviously trying to cover it up by finding her. Huh? So the guy that found the body was actually, he knew the cops were so inept that they wouldn't find the body. So he was like, instead of just leaving this body here that I murdered and am covering up, I'm gonna be the one that discovers the body. And then that way, this is so stupid.
Arndt would later be harshly criticized for two key decisions: asking John Ramsey to search the house and allowing John Ramsey to place the blanket on JonBenet's.
Oh, so the police weren't criticized for literally moving the body, like for no reason. John moved it because he finds his daughter and he's like, holy fuck. But she moves it because why? So we're not widely criticizing the cops for how they showed up, which was inappropriate for kidnapping. We're not criticizing the cops for not protecting the crime scene. We're not criticizing the cops for not properly searching the house. We're not criticizing the cops for not making a deal at 10 o'clock when the ransom call didn't come in. We're not criticizing the cops for leaving Karen there without like instructions. We're not criticizing the cops for not answering Karen's phone calls. It's only, we're criticizing the cops for what we let John do.
Body.
You had to know that that was going to contaminate.
Were there lights in the wine cellar? There was a light, but the light switch wasn't in like apparently either of the two places you would expect it. Like you open the door and there's no light switch there. So they were like, fuck it. Now what's funny though is, isn't there a flashlight on the belt of a cop's uniform? Doesn't every police officer have a flashlight? Yes, no, correct me if I'm wrong. All cops carry flashlights.
Evidence.
JonBenet's body was in and of itself a crime scene. Would it be nice if John hadn't found JonBenet? Absolutely.
Would it have been nice if one of the cops was capable of finding the daughter? Like, how do we not address it? Hey, what up, dude? We are watching your videos, just by the way. If you happen to want, as a side note, I did a little thing where I went to the house. So if you ever want like the dimensions or the feel of it, I've got it. And can get back there if need be. And to remind everybody, this grate down here is where the broken window was. So to me, if you were going to come out of here, you've got to cross the backyard, which even in the 90s, I would assume a house like this has motion lights, floodlights. So I would think that would turn on the floodlights. But is this JonBenet's balcony? I think it is. I think this is JonBenet's balcony. But you would come across here. But if you went to the other side of the house, this right here is the area where there was supposedly a door that was left open. No, not one of the poem guys. No. Not the, no. That's True Crime Garage. But Frank Zeller did reach out, or did say something on one of the posts. Not only did Officer Rich French fail to open that door that morning, but the photographer also failed to open that door. I mean, I mentioned to my neighbor, who was like a chief or something of police in this area, and he's kind of tight-lipped, but every time I mention the Boulder police, you can see the look on his face. Okay, so this right here, when you look at the schematics, this door leads right to the spiral staircase where the note was left, supposedly. So if the note was right there, we've talked about this. You could come in that door, go up, get JonBenet, go down there. You would walk straight, probably like 20 steps, make a left, and that's going to lead you to the downstairs steps. If they went out the window, then you didn't even have to backtrack. But when would you have put the fucking ransom note up there? So it would make a lot of sense to come in and out of that door. That's just my theory. But since we're looking at intruder stuff today, one of the videos we watch, I think Lou climbs through the window. I think it's silly to come in the house that way, but whatever. So yeah, I've got some footage of the back alley and whatnot.
And would it be nice if he hadn't put a blanket? Yeah, it would be great. And it would be nice.
Would have been
if there were
great if
other
you didn't move the fucking body too, Starling.
people to help control and keep people away. That would have been wonderful. But that's not the circumstances that I had available that day.
Still alone in the living room with John Ramsey, Arndt then heard Patsy Ramsey's voice.
And
So it was open.
I heard a wail, just a guttural moan, aching wail.
They would have had to have walked past at least one. Or is that your way of saying why wouldn't they, if they wanted a kidnapper, they would have? Because if you came in that door, you could have just walked right out that door if what you wanted to do was kidnap her.
From the back area, it's probably one of the most pitiful things I've ever heard, and anguished. And I saw the rest
Dude, I can't stand her fucking fundy whisper.
of the people.
I saw the people. I saw it. It's almost as creepy as when Biden whispers into the mic.
Patsy and Pastor and
I'm
the boyfriend
serious.
come from the den towards the living room. So I said, if you want to say goodbye to JonBenet, this is the only time you'll have to do it. And, there's just so much.
Didn't she, at what year did she start to like become nicer to the fucking Ramseys? At one point, she kind of changed her mind, right? The bug eye. We call her Crazy Eyes. We call her Crazy Eyes.
There's so much pain. And I called 911. I get my radio number.
Wait. There's so many little things that crack me up about this cunt. So wait a second. You're a cop. And your own superiors and your fucking peers were ignoring you to a point where you called 911 like civvies do. You didn't. I called like a civvy, and I had to give him my number because the cops didn't give a fuck.
I said, the kidnapping has turned into a murder,
This house had suddenly become a homicide crime scene.
Oh, it became hell.
Yeah, yeah.
JonBenet was brought up about 5 minutes after 1. And at 10 after 1, nobody'd shown up. And I looked out the window to the street and I saw an ambulance slowly drive by. And I thought, I am in the Twilight Zone.
Meanwhile, the pastor led the Ramseys and their friends in prayer in the living.
Wait, you weren't in the Twilight Zone when all the cops left you. And your own boss was like, just give him something to do. I don't know. We don't give a fuck about you. Was the phone tapped? I mean, it would make sense if you're waiting on a fucking call. But all I know about phone tapping back then was like the videos where they show them putting like this microphone on the back of the landline.
Living room, holding hands.
I mean, I think I got my first cell phone in 97. And all that had been out by then were like bag phones and brick phones.
As JonBenet's body lay before them.
I thought that would be the best way to organize everyone, to keep them distracted, to keep them from touching JonBenet, and to keep them focused on something other than looking
Phone
at
was
JonBenet.
tapped around 8:30.
1:20
Which is funny because the call wasn't even expected that day.
p.m. after 3 hours as the only officer on what Arndt calls an incredibly tense crime scene, and 20 minutes after JonBenet's body was found, backup finally arrived.
Okay, so the first 911 call, it took 7 minutes for them to get there. The next 911 call by the cop, it took 20 minutes to get there. This is Boulder. Honestly, you can get from anywhere in Boulder to that house in 20 minutes. From as far north as you want to go in Boulder, I bet you can get to this house in 20 minutes. Even if you stop at all the lights. Like you could go up Pine. Wait, you can go up 15. You can go up Pine. No, Pine's across street. You can go up 15th all the way to the church. I mean, it's crazy. They hate her. They don't like her. That meant the 26th or 27th is questionable. Well, I mean, when it says I'm going to call tomorrow, there's no way they thought that note would be discovered on the 25th.
The next day, the autopsy on JonBenet was conducted. Linda Arndt was there.
I hadn't seen savagery done to a child.
How many children autopsies in Boulder has your crazy eye slaughter of the lambs? How many have you been to? I've never seen a 6-year-old slaughtered like that. Of course, it's actually the first murder I've ever been a part of.
Or even an adult until...
To be well rested. Exactly. I didn't even think about that. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be rough.
The doctor peeled back her
True.
skull and saw that horrific fracture.
I mean, normally it's fine when I watch a pathologist or a fucking coroner peel back a spine. Normally, peel back a skull. I'm normally fine when you cut and you just pull back the skin. That's not the problem.
To her head. It was the length of her head.
I expect this woman to be wearing a cross.
It was 8.5 inches long, and there was something else even more disturbing.
She had trauma to her vagina.
What kind of trauma?
It would be trauma that would be consistent with...
Dude, this reminds me, what's her name? Britt, whatever. The one that did the response in the funny voice. I mean, it's almost identical.
Injuries seen in sexual assault cases.
Recently?
I guess the best way to say that was what was...
Yeah, exactly. Look, I have a daughter that was a bedwetter up until like 9 years old. So the thing about the pull-ups, the thing about putting a plastic cover on the bed and letting them sit and deal with the sheets, Like, that's what the doctors tell you to do. Like, I've been through this personally. I know exactly what the doctors tell you how to handle this. Stop putting them in pull-ups because their body isn't going to get the feedback to wake them up so that this can stop. Now, could it come from like some sort of trauma? Sure. What's the deal with her wanting adults to wipe her ass? That's fucking weird. But the idea that all this is like Patty got angry because the bed was wet. Get the fuck out of here.
Scene was not a first time.
Yes, I agree with you.
The coroner, in fact, said the evidence was inconclusive.
I mean, I frankly don't even know that there was pineapple. I mean, it said traces of what could have been pineapple in her intestines. And they're like, obviously, they killed her with pineapple.
But ABC News has confirmed that 3 medical experts who consulted for the Boulder Police Department concluded the injuries
well, we know there's improper wiping. Like, that was systemic for her.
Were consistent with prior sexual abuse. As the Ramsey investigation...
Was it consistent with anything else? Oh, no, not important.
...dragged on for weeks, then months, and then years, the criticism of Linda Arndt's actions that December day continued. But she still defends her actions, saying she has become a scapegoat for a flawed investigation.
I did nothing wrong. We were perfect as cops.
And Linda Arndt remains convinced that she knows who killed JonBenet Ramsey. She will not say the killer's name, but has no doubt that justice will never...
She won't say the killer's name. She will say, I knew all the things I said about John Ramsey. When he was face to face with me and we had a nonverbal communication, I knew immediately I was looking at the killer. But also, I'm not going to say it was John Ramsey. I fucking hate people.
...be done.
Do you think this person will ever be indicted?
Correct.
Will ever be charged or convicted?
No.
What you're saying is, whoever killed JonBenet will get away with murder.
Yes.
That was 1999.
I don't know what that is.
In June of 2001, a federal judge dismissed her lawsuit, saying Arndt failed to prove the police chiefs violated her First Amendment rights. Stay tuned to ABC News Now.
There were also cherry and grape skins. So there might have been no pineapple at all. But yet they talk, every time the cops mention it, they mention it as fact. Just like they mentioned the fact that we can't eliminate Patsy's handwriting meant that she did it. And it's also crazy how fucking shitty the cops were.
On abcnews.com for the latest.
I did a little bit more learning about Alex Hunter. And it's upper small intestines. It is interesting. I have always heard about the plea deals and all the stuff he was doing. But they were doing like community-based incentives for policing. So they were trying to not do retributive or I can't think of the word right now, where it's just punishment. They were way more worried about rehab and getting people to be productive members of society than they were just jailing them. And although Hunter definitely should have prosecuted some cases differently, he was very popular in Boulder for the type of outlook he had on policing. So the cops hated him because they just wanted, it was like The Wire. They just wanted to do rip and runs. Whereas some of the people wanted to actually improve the neighborhoods.
Information. That's all for this.
Okay, this is a random one. I've got this on a faster speed so we can speed through it. But it says everything you need to know, recent developments. It's about 3 months, or about a month old. And just a way to give us a quick reminder. Most of us already know all this stuff, but whatever.
If a survey were to be taken among true crime enthusiasts on which case they would like to see solved, our bet would be that the majority would say the JonBenet Ramsey case.
Well, it looks like Tupac got solved.
In 2024, the enigmatic murder of JonBenet Ramsey has an increased likelihood of being solved 27 years
So
after the
4.5.
6-year-old
Yeah. Where other people were like 1.5 or 2, but they don't really matter.
child was discovered strangled to death in the basement of her family's Boulder, Colorado home, according to her father, John Ramsey. Join us as we look at the reactivation of the case, who's involved, the total ineptitude of the Boulder police, and what we can expect to learn with the authorities' renewed interest.
I also want to state, as a father, right? When I got my divorce, I called my ex to schedule to make sure all the details of picking my kids up the next day. And I was told I need to contact her attorney or some shit and that I can't have the kids. Well, they had orchestrated accusations of abuse on me. And a PFA was ordered. And then the PFA was removed, but I had to have supervised visitation because of the accusations. So I had 50-50 custody, and one of my parents had to be there at every moment I was with my kids. And even after the accusations were rescinded and the charges were thrown out, the judge still ordered a punishment for me to be required to go through some classes. Now, nothing for the parent that was involved in the false accusations. Only something for the dad. And if I found my daughter dead, and within an hour, I was being accused by the people in charge of investigating of doing it, there is no fucking chance I would speak to the police without an attorney. No shot. Absolutely no chance in the world I would speak to the police that believe I killed my daughter without an attorney. Because it is...
Shut the fuck up. Don't forget to shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. You don't say a fucking word. You know what you do? You shut the fuck up.
True.
In the infamous cold case. Nearly 3 decades after the senseless murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey, a glimmer of hope has appeared as a devoted cold case team began re-examining key evidence that might ultimately reveal her killer's identity. The Colorado cold case team's renewed investigation into the long-standing mystery has sparked interest and hope, especially for JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, who has long sought justice for his daughter and himself. In a recent interview with 60 Minutes Australia, John Ramsey says he's starting 2024 with more hope than ever before. I am more optimistic than I've been since the beginning, he said, following the completion of a year-long study by the Colorado cold case review team.
I'm just bitter and my kids don't talk to me, but it'll be fine.
His daughter's murder. In 2007, legislation was passed to establish the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Team, the Cold Case Task Force, and the Cold Case Database. In 2022, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation obtained funding to set up a full-time cold case team.
One solve. If you have any people from westward that that might be worth talking to, let me know, because I still live here.
The cold case team includes 4 agents, 1 analyst, 1 forensic investigative genetic genealogy analyst, and a supervisor. They also have 2 DNA and 1 latent print forensic scientist working with the team. A multi-agency team consisting of personnel from the Boulder Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, District Attorney's Office, Colorado Department of Public Safety, and Colorado Bureau of Investigation coordinated and worked extremely hard on the resumed attempts to solve the case, District Attorney Michael Doherty said. These agencies collaborated with private labs that specialize in different types of DNA analysis, according to Doherty. The Boulder Police Department's initial investigation received considerable backlash for focusing on JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, as primary suspects. They made up their mind on day 1, and the conclusion was that I killed my daughter, John said in an interview.
Well, I mean, we know that's true because literally Arndt said that. I made up my mind and it's never wavered.
There's nothing more dangerous than a police department that's made up its mind because they are totally excluding anything that conflicts with that conclusion, he noted in a 60 Minutes interview. When asked in November 2022 whether he believed the case would ever be solved, John Ramsey said, "Not if it stays in the hands of the Boulder police. No, I don't. I really don't."
This does make so much more sense why there was so much interaction between the Ramseys and the DA's office, because the police cut out both the DA and the Ramseys.
How does Ramsey feel about his accusers being deeply embedded in the new investigation? While Ramsey has often feuded with Boulder police officers, he claims that things have changed dramatically in the investigation and at the BPD. The police department finally has competent leadership, has dealt with the problems in the detective division, and has included the FBI in discussions on how to proceed, Ramsey said. All I have asked is that they do all that is possible using the latest DNA sampling technology available in the private sector, and then proceed based on the results, he added. The multi-agency team had its work cut out for it on the Ramsey case. According to the BPD, an intensive effort digitized all evidence to create a comprehensive and searchable database containing thousands of information files, bringing together more than 21,000 tips, over 1,000 interviews conducted across 17 states.
I mean, at this point, you should be able to enter it all into AI, and AI be like, this dude did it.
And 2 foreign countries, and
Here's his
samples from more than
DNA.
200 different individuals, including handwriting, DNA,
Where are the precogs when you need them?
fingerprints, and shoe prints. The JonBenet case file is said to now consist of nearly 2,500 pieces of evidence and roughly 40,000 reports, with more than 1 million pages documenting the investigation, according to BPD officials. A fresh inventory of all collected evidence was made available for investigative review, which would not have been possible without the assistance of the FBI, they added. Although the team has kept their cards close to their chest, an investigator and forensic pathologist have some idea or opinion.
I thought the FBI wasn't involved until later. Wait. They were involved. Wait a minute. When did he show up?
On what evidence is being looked at
my
and shared their
timeline.
thoughts on the 60 Minutes episode. John San Agustin.
Blame the cops?
Within days of JonBenet's murder, police contacted Detective John San Agustin. Boulder police were ill-equipped to handle a case of this caliber and hoped the seasoned detective could point them in the right direction. The former detective said he was brought in to help with the Ramsey cold case investigation, but became frustrated within hours after reviewing the evidence and the BPD's unwillingness to listen to any theories that contradicted their own, namely that a family member was involved. There were at least 2,500 leads in the early part of the investigation that literally...
I can allot for the possibility that there was some foul, scandalous shit going on in Boulder. I can say there's a plausibility people through these pageants are fucking disgusting. I can say I will never trust the church to not be involved in some sort of pedophilia. And the fact that Hoverstock was there in the morning and that so much of this revolved around the church. I mean, it could be ritualistic shit. I mean, Aiken would know more than any of us that fucking there are people out there doing weird fucking ritual bullshit. Was brought in that morning. Well, it was kidnapping. Yeah, sent away. When it was discovered, it was not a kidnapping. Yeah, they were like, no, we don't need you. But then the next day, didn't they change their mind?
were never followed up on because tunnel vision existed from the moment the murder happened.
Look, the fact that the idea of blood libel was created, I guarantee you, like everything else, was done out of projection. They were doing some fucking blood rituals, and they were like, no, it's not us, it's the Jews.
The focus was on John and Patsy Ramsey, he explained. San Agustin showed 60 Minutes the back doorway leading to the Ramsey house and original crime scene images from that
Dude, why is Santos...
cold day in 1996. The photograph showed an open basement window.
Why is Anthony DeVolder in this fucking video?
With a suitcase beneath it. Fibers from the young beauty queen's clothes had been discovered in the case, a scuff mark on the wall which may have been from a shoe, and shards of glass lying on top of the case. According to San Agustin, the evidence suggested that an intruder was involved in the murder.
Yeah, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, right, to know that this is what we call a clue, right? You got an open window, you got a scuff mark on the wall,
I do like
you have
that.
a suitcase,
So
on the suitcase
snarky.
is some broken glass.
It was first said that there were no traces of forced entry at the Ramsey family home, where JonBenet had gone missing before being discovered dead in the basement 7 hours later. No tracks were found in the snow, but a boot imprint was discovered
There was no snow. That's why. There was no snow.
later. It was also discovered that a damaged window...
Wait. Look, do you see any snow in the picture? Do you see any snow? There weren't any footprints in the snow. That didn't exist. Oh my fuck.
Tracks were found in the snow, but a boot imprint was discovered later. It was also discovered that a damaged window in the basement had been left open, which was first discounted as an access point, but an investigator later proved that a person could fit through it.
Wait a second. Wait a second.
It was first discounted as an access point.
I thought it was 3 separate windows. And then you had to go through the middle one.
But an investigator later proved that a person could fit through it. According
Wait a second. No. That's not the window. That can't be the window.
It is an access point, but
that's not the window. This chair wasn't there. There's no fucking door there. And here's another door that doesn't exist. Well, that door might actually exist. Like the 2 doors were open. I know, dude. I know. I didn't know there were 2 doors, but they were already like, there's like over 100 access points to that house with windows and shit. And they knew that morning there was no break-in. That is not the window. Yeah, I don't understand. I didn't think that was the window.
But an investigator later proved that a person could fit through it. According to San Agustin, all of this evidence was dismissed by the BPD, but was by no means the only evidence they dismissed and kept from the family. One of the most shocking pieces
they
of evidence...
They were like, get me B-roll of a basement window, please.
...away from JonBenet's parents...
This is what they were like. This is where they went. I love this.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll. We got that B-roll. 2 men pointing at an office file? We got that B-roll. Bored man flipping through channels? We got that B-roll. Angry man in traffic? Yeah, we got that B-roll. What do you want him to wear? Casual? Upscale casual? Business? We got that B-roll. Why does he look so upset? Maybe he's late for work. Nope, he's at work. He's a B-roll actor. Happy couple walking on the beach? We got that B-roll. Want that happy couple to kiss? No problem. Want him to get a little fresh with the lady? Done. Hey, you two, cut it out and stay at the ocean so I can get B-roll of that. That's better. What a nice view of the ocean. That's B-roll of the ocean. Think that's all the B-roll we got? Not even close. Overwhelmed man trying to pay bills? Yeah, we got it. Frustrated man looking for a job in the paper? You know we got it. And lunch meeting success. Hey, look, that's me. I like my B-roll so much I'm in it. Kurt Gibson hitting a game-winning home run in the '88 World Series. No!
On the west side of the dining room. The dining room is the one... Is the dining room the one with the bump out? No. It's the one on the first floor right above that exit window.
That's too specific. That is not B-roll. Doctor talking to smiling patient. We got that B-roll. Man having trouble sleeping. Got it. What's his problem? He doesn't like being in B-roll? I was just in some B-roll and I loved it. The sneezer, backache, headache, and depressed woman.
We got that B-roll. Kurt Gibson hitting a home run in the 1986 Olympic or 1986 World Series. No, that is not B-roll. That is too specific.
Was comprised of blood-stained underwear and fingernail clippings.
Okay, sorry. Sorry for the interruption. First, John Ramsey went through that window. I don't think I believe that. I personally don't believe he made it through that window. And the reason I don't believe it is, one, he said he didn't know how he broke it. Which, how's that fucking possible? How do you not know how you broke the window? But more importantly than that, how do you kick it in the space available? Like, you would need like maybe you could turn sideways to get a little momentum, but fuck, I taught martial arts for years. I don't think I could break that window that way.
When the basement had been left open, which was first discounted as an access point, but an investigator...
Burke remembers being there when John broke the window, but he should have been in Charleroi. Burke should have, or John should have.
Later proved that a person could fit through it. According to San Agustin...
Wait, they did it again.
but an investigator later proved that a person could fit through it. According to San Agustin, all of this evidence was dismissed by the BPD, but was by no means the only evidence they dismissed and kept from the family. One of the most shocking pieces of evidence pointing
Well, I don't have a problem with them keeping evidence from the family.
away from JonBenet's parents was comprised of blood-stained underwear and fingernail clippings. On February 15, 1997, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation completed the initial DNA testing in the Ramsey case. This was the first DNA test conducted by law enforcement in this case, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation said from the start that the DNA was mixed. This means that more than one source was discovered in the DNA sample.
Wait, they didn't say that from the beginning, did they?
The written report presented to the Boulder Police Department said that
If they said it was mixed, then they shouldn't have ever excluded anybody.
the DNA profiles developed from bloodstains from panties as well as from right and left-hand fingernails from JonBenet revealed a mixture from which the significant component matched JonBenet. If the minor components were contributed by a single individual, then John Andrew Ramsey, Melinda Ramsey, John B. Ramsey, Patricia Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, and Jeff Ramsey would be excluded as a source of the DNA analyzed on those exhibits. This DNA evidence
How could you possibly trust any of the evidence collected by Boulder? I mean, it could be real, but how can you depend on the fucking DNA evidence of a crime scene they destroyed, of a body they touched?
Including the Ramseys, was completed just a little over 2 weeks after the murder, yet the authorities neglected to inform them of this crucial fact. It would take 11 long
Hoffman
years for the
Pugh
Ramseys to get an apology
cleaned
for
up
this
the
injustice.
glass.
July 9th, 2008.
So Merv was supposed to fix it. I mean, I didn't think John would fix it. I would have assumed they'd have paid somebody to fix it, but
Mr. John Ramsey, as you are aware, since December 2002, the Boulder District Attorney's Office has
I mean, but I don't understand. Here's what I don't get, right? We get weird weather in Colorado, especially on the Front Range where he is. But how could that window be broken and the elements not be coming in all the time? Like every time it snowed, you'd have snow in your basement. Every time it rains, you'd have rain in your basement. What kind of millionaire just allows the elements to come into their house? My family would never fucking allow that to happen.
in the agency responsible for the investigation of the homicide of your
Notice
daughter.
how I said my family, because even though I could be in that category, I am the kind of guy that would let that happen.
JonBenet. I understand that the fact that we have not been able to identify the person who killed her is a great disappointment that is a continuing hardship for you and your family. However, significant new evidence has recently been discovered through the application of relatively new methods of DNA analysis. This new scientific evidence
Commingled
convinces
with
us
her
that
blood
it is
in the
appropriate,
panties.
given the circumstances of this case, to state that
Now, I heard other reports that said they used the same clippers on all 10 nails, and that could have contamination. I struggle. Like, I guess I haven't read the report for myself, which is what I need to do.
that we do not consider your immediate family, including you, your wife Patsy, and your son Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime. I wish we could have done so before Mrs. Ramsey died.
Yeah.
To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry. No innocent...
Yeah, but I'm just saying. But they do seem to be okay with the house being dirty. Here's my question. Did Hoffman Pugh work full-time for the Ramseys, or did she work for other houses also?
person should have to endure such an extensive trial in the court of public opinion,
Two
especially when
different
public
labs, okay.
officials have not had sufficient evidence to initiate a trial in a court of law. I have the greatest respect for the way you and your family have handled this adversity. Another expert featured on the show has also aired his misgivings about how the BPD handled the case and mishandled the vital evidence he supplied them
Dude,
with.
they didn't just mishandle the evidence. They mishandled how they arrived. They mishandled how they handled the house once they arrived. They mishandled how they left everybody alone. There's not a thing they did right that morning. Well, they showed up in 7 minutes. That was good.
Dr. Michael Doberson. Alex Hunter, the Boulder District Attorney, decided to get help in solving the crime after continually hitting his head against the wall with the BPD. He turned to Lou Smith, a seasoned Colorado Springs homicide detective who had recently resigned from the force. Smith was known as
Is he the most respectable man in all of this? It seems like it.
a no-nonsense evidence man, a tenacious detective who often solved complex crimes after others had given up. Smith's assignment was to investigate the police's assumption that one or both of JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy, were involved in the murder. As Smith examined the evidence, he became confident that someone had broken into the home and killed JonBenet while her family was sleeping. Smith resigned in protest in September 1998 after the BPD kept him in the
they did the pig test, which seems a little fucked.
dark as they kept up the parent did it narrative. Smith declined publicly discussing the facts that led to his intruder theory. There's a vicious killer out there, he went on to say, and nobody is
I
looking
want to see his suspect list
for him. When Smith initially started investigating the murder, the primary BPD belief was that one of the parents had bludgeoned their daughter in a fit of rage, possibly because she had wet the bed, and that one or both of them covered up the crime by staging a murder and drafting a fake ransom letter.
I don't even understand how this theory makes a lick of sense. Like, let me walk through this assumption. Sometime in the morning, Patsy got angry and shoved JonBenet Ramsey. And then to cover up, well, wait a minute, because she didn't die when she hit her head. In fact, there was no blood. There was no physical evidence of a wound to the point that they didn't know it existed until they peeled her wig back. So the first assumption is that Patty cracked the girl's head open, but didn't actually crack the girl's head open. You would just think she had a head injury. And instead of like all the other times there was an emergency or an injury and they called an ambulance or went to the hospital, this time they decided, we're sick of this. I am going to murder my beauty queen daughter. I don't know, man. What up, Orange? So not only am I going to murder my beauty queen daughter, I am going to fasten a garrote. And not a garrote like anybody else would think of, with two handles. I'm going to fasten one of the torture type garrotes that was like medieval bullshit. And to add to the mystery, I'm going to sexually assault with a paintbrush my daughter. And then we're going to strategically write a letter in which we leave zero evidence physically that we did it, because we put gloves on to cover up all the evidence. And then we used soap to try to wash off our daughter to protect the evidence. And then early morning, we hid her body and called the cops. Because if we could involve the cops immediately, we knew they wouldn't be able to find the body. Unbelievable.
At one stage, Smith believed the parents were the probable culprits. But as he examined the evidence, including police crime scene images and video, he started to question his initial assumption. Smith learned that a basement window was open, and a window well outside revealed evidence.
Okay, so that's the actual window. Here's a screen for the right one, I guess. There's no screen on this one, and there's no screen on this one. But, oh, okay, wait a second. So if this was broken, it was broken maybe on an upper portion in which he reached a latch and then opened the window. If that's the case, and it was only like one of the 4 panes that was broken, that makes more sense to me. That also makes more sense about how when you would reach in, you might knock some of the pieces off, not being more careful. But you wouldn't knock those pieces off if you left from the inside.
Of a recent disturbance. However, the police unexpectedly denied an officer's request to send police dogs to find a probable scent trail. Smith discovered leaves.
Why would you do that? We haven't investigated a murder this year, so no, we don't need the dog. We don't need the dog to help us in our fucking... God, it's so hard to not think the cops were involved.
And trash, including foam packing peanuts outside the home in the window well. He discovered identical leaves and foam peanuts inside the basement.
That's what I'm saying. It's a nonsensical theory. Like, people can give you the surface version. She wet the bed and then they try to cover up the killing. Okay, well, walk me through the sexual assault part. What? They sexually assaulted their daughter to cover up killing her? Is that what you're saying?
Including one 60 feet away in the room where JonBenet was found, possibly indicating that an intruder inadvertently transported the material into the basement after entering through the window. The wind sure didn't blow those in there, Smith said.
Interesting.
Smith noticed a fresh print on a high-tech sneaker, a brand that no one in the
I like that you put the fucking panic murder room, the torture room where you lock up your victims. I like how you put wine cellar.
family owned. Smith examined autopsy images and saw strange abrasions on JonBenet's back and face. Smith questioned whether they were caused by a stun gun, an unusual weapon for a parent to use on their child. Smith measured the markings and determined they matched a stun gun called the air taser. He began to believe
Wait
that
a second.
Smith measured.
Is that the train track picture? Oh no, that's the calipers. I'm an idiot. Because they tried to hold up Burke's train tracks to the marks as maybe she fell into the train tracks twice.
The markings and determined they matched a stun gun called the air taser. He began to believe that the perpetrator may have used the stun gun on JonBenet when she was sleeping and then took her to the basement. The Boulder police
Did they test any of the cops? Like, do they DNA test every cop?
disputed Smith's stun gun explanation. They sent some of the autopsy photos to Arapahoe County coroner Dr. Michael Doberson, who had studied stun gun injuries on pigs just 3 months before the murder.
That
to
is the
discount
train
Smith's
track?
theory. According to the BPD, Doberson said that he did not believe that the marks were caused by a stun gun, as Smith indicated. However, he denied saying that. Doberson has claimed that he was misquoted. That was something of a misstatement, since my real conclusion was that I couldn't, at that time, say whether this was a stun gun injury or not, because we had to have a weapon to compare it to. Doberson said he requested further information, including more images and a stun gun matching the markings. However, Doberson never heard from the BPD again. It was Smith who brought him the taser and the close-up photos of the injuries. When Doberson clarified what he actually said, acquired the additional information he requested, and concluded that the experiment reveals precisely the same marks and cell changes that were seen on JonBenet, the Boulder police, who initially approached him as the expert on stun guns, ignored his expert opinion. If you are shocked...
They hired him because he's an expert on stun guns. And then when they gave him something he didn't want, they're like, nah, get out. No, honestly, that is some Trump stuff right there. I tell the story. I just told the story to my neighbor that back February 2020, that was when I used to watch like every fucking government hearing that went on. And I watched the Health Human Services lady or NIH lady, whoever she was, say in a hearing that, like, look, this COVID thing isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You guys need to start thinking about remote learning, remote work, and like what you're going to do infrastructure wise. And I was like, holy fuck. And then they fired her the next day for her honesty.
Shocked by the ineffective and blinkers-on approach of the BPD concerning the evidence put forward to them for a possible intruder killing JonBenet, their bungling police work would become more evident just 9 months after the gruesome crime. 9 months after JonBenet's unresolved death,
uniform.
A young girl from the same Boulder, Colorado dancing school as the murdered beauty queen was
I
assaulted
would
in her bed by a
imagine,
masked.
even if you were to put it perfectly on, you would have ununiform marks. Like, I mean, even if uniform things happen, it doesn't mean the results would look identical because of angles and what bursts and how the bruise would work.
Intruder. The girl, known by the alias Amy, woke up in the early hours of September 14th, 1997, to discover a man dressed in all black standing at her bedside.
Didn't he also... something tape... Wait, to her face from the laser. Melt tape. So, at one point, the tape was on when she was stun gunned. Man, I guess I didn't really think about it. If you were going to pick her up from the bed, you could easily make tape the first thing you did.
With his hand over her mouth. The perpetrator used Amy's first name and threatened to knock her out if she died. Woke up in the after JonBenet's unresolved death. A young girl from the same Boulder, Colorado dancing school as the murdered beauty queen was assaulted in her bed by a masked intruder. The girl, known by the alias Amy, woke up in the early hours of September 14th, 1997, to discover a man dressed in all black standing at her bedside with his hand over her mouth.
Damn, I forgot to look. What's the address of this?
The perpetrator used Amy's first name and
what is the address to Amy's case?
Knock her out if she yelled. Amy was physically and sexually assaulted by the unknown perpetrator over a few terrifying minutes.
Sexually assaulted with what?
Amy's family thinks the man meant to kidnap her. However, the planned kidnapping was thwarted when the girl's mother came into the room holding a can of mace, having awakened to the sound of whispering voices down the hall. Amy's family members compared the intruder.
It's lucky he wasn't down my hall. That shit wouldn't have been mace. That shit would not have been mace if it was down the hall from me. He would have heard.
To a ninja who escaped the house by jumping out of a second-floor window and disappearing into...
Ninja is oftenly used as code. I don't think that's what was meant here. But Amy was 14, though. Are you sure? Because they were in the same dance class, I thought. Doesn't mean she couldn't have been 14. Was stunned unconscious for her abduction.
The night. In an interview, Amy's father said that he thinks the assailant had been watching the family for some time before the incident occurred.
But I'm not sure.
Targeting his daughter at her dancing school.
I know there was a woman a year later that was kidnapped off of the Boulder campus, I think. I might be confusing that with another one, but that's like an actual college kid.
Dance west before striking at an opportune time. Police documents acquired by a major news site showed that detectives were alerted to a possible hiding place where Amy's assailant may have been while watching the victim and her family. 2 months after the assault, the family's immediate neighbor informed authorities that they had discovered proof that someone was living in a seldom-used flat above their garage. According to the records, the illegal resident left behind various items and rubbish, including empty beer cans, which were taken by BPD detectives. It is unknown if the objects were ever tested for DNA, and the Boulder Police Department refused to respond when asked. Amy's father told authorities that whoever had been living above his neighbor's garage was most...
Yo, they're not really good at... Was it John Ramsey's fault you didn't solve this one too?
...likely responsible for sexually abusing his daughter. Amy's father also asked authorities to look into the possibility that the assault on his daughter was related to the death of JonBenet, who was discovered murdered less than 2 miles away, barely 9 months earlier. In addition to attending the same dancing school...
Hey, One Salt, what do you know about Rocky Flats? Do you know anything about Rocky Flats?
Both girls took part in several public events in the months before their victimization. However, Amy's father said that Boulder police were dismissive and disinterested in exploring any apparent similarities between the two crimes, and that they were even hostile to him for making the suggestion. JonBenet's father, like Amy's father, believes that his family was being watched in the months leading up to the murder. Ramsey described the parallels between the two.
One Salt, I plan on playing your eyewitnesses video in just a little bit.
Two crimes as unbelievable. More shocking, he added, was that Boulder investigators ignored Amy's father's request to examine the cases together. It could very well be the same guy, John said. I really thought this was related. There's a similar mode of operation, and it needs to be considered a possible link. But it's shocking, absolutely shocking, that Boulder police didn't
Threw away her
investigate the link.
sheets.
They absolutely should have. Amy's father accused the BPD.
Oh, God. So, in 1989, 1989's the number. Another summer. There is a place that is a little south of Boulder. That they, for like 40 years, maybe 50 years, they made what are called plutonium triggers. And in plutonium triggers, it's not like a trigger. It's like a fucking high radioactive processing product that they basically broke all these environmental laws. And there was an FBI raid on the place in 89 that led to the first ever special grand jury in Colorado. And they were going to issue 8 indictments, 3 against Department of Energy people and 5 against people of the company. And the DOJ came in and squashed the results of the grand jury. And they had been threatened with jail time if they leak anything. And that grand jury stuff has been leaked, and the same law firm that was in that also ended up representing John Ramsey. So there's a lot of rumors about jury tampering in grand juries and manipulation of grand juries in this exact area.
Of mishandling the investigation into his daughter's assault by
there's a lake behind my house, right? And we were always told you're not allowed to swim there, and they said you couldn't swim there because of some random reason, but it's actually the plutonium levels are like a bit fucking high in the water.
By neglecting to properly secure evidence, ignoring promising leads,
Yeah.
and overall being uninterested and
NORAD,
unhelpful.
yeah.
He has often called the case investigators incompetent.
My buddy is like a facility manager for Halliburton.
And arrogant. His statements have mirrored John Ramsey's
Had
description
Morgan and Foreman,
of
yeah.
BPD investigators. According to Amy's case documents, two of the investigators who investigated JonBenet's
And Lynn Wood later became a fucking absolute nut job, lost his license.
murder also looked into Amy's attack. The investigators were Linda
Crazy Eye Starling.
Arndt and Thomas Trujillo. Arndt, who had been
Trujillo got fired recently.
the sole law enforcement officer on the scene when JonBenet's body was discovered, was removed from the Ramsey case in 1997 after receiving harsh criticism and ridicule for how she handled the investigation and failed to safeguard the crime scene. After taking a prolonged
Notice the fence. Okay, the lack of fence.
criticism and ridicule for how she handled the investigation and failed to
Yeah, there was that wrought iron shit wasn't there. So I imagine the door in the back by the garage would have, like, to get in and out of there, there'd have been no wrought iron gate.
safeguard the crime scene. After taking a prolonged medical vacation for physical exhaustion and strain, Arndt was assigned to Amy's case on September 17th, 3 days after the assault.
Lynn Wood back then was like an extremely well-respected attorney.
To the investigation, Amy's parents informed Arndt that they both felt the assault was tied to JonBenet's case. Arndt also interviewed several of Amy's acquaintances, which enraged her father since it essentially exposed her as a victim of sexual assault to her peers, something the family had hoped to keep hidden. Trujillo was recently removed as chief of the BPD's investigations section and transferred to night patrol after an internal evaluation showed that several unnamed incidents were not adequately handled between 2019 and 2020.
That's why he got fired, because he wasn't even doing the investigations he was in charge of.
It's like a second bank robbery in a small town. You've got to look and see if there's a connection, Ramsey would say, and in my mind, there was a huge connection, both in terms of how it was accomplished, the fact they were both children, and that my daughter and Amy both went to the same dance school. But they didn't. It's insane. Not everyone is as excited as John Ramsey about the new news. Many online commentators feel that it just feels like a case of deja vu. One Redditor posted, "Here we go again, a one-sided John Ramsey storyline. Told, of course, by John Ramsey."
How are we quoting a Redditor? How are we quoting a Redditor in a serious... Come on.
Using a female talking head. There is no new evidence that will solve this crime.
He was a shark back
My
then.
only question is, where was John Ramsey all those years
He oughta
JonBenet
been
had
nuts,
been in a
yeah.
cold grave? Not looking for her killer like he is now. It's
So, the funny thing is, the reason we're doing this with the Ramsey stuff is I love large investigations. I actually, a funny little weird story, I was so far ahead of what actually happened in the 2020 election that there was a guy in Denver by the name of Eric Coomer who was like a bigwig for Dominion voting systems. And he was named like by name by Giuliani and others, like publicly, to a point where he got all the death threats, had to move, all this shit. And he had a lawsuit. And I was reading the depositions from the lawsuits and wrote an email to the attorneys of the case, and was like December 28th of 2021, and said, "Hey, I was reading your depositions. When it comes to Phil Waldron, here's some information and timeline that I think you missed. And here's the article, and here's the section." And literally the next morning they wrote back and they were like, "Yep, thank you. That'll be very helpful as we go against him and reawaken America." And so, like, I had already done a full, like, 7-8 part series week by week on what happened before the first January 6th hearing. So everybody that watches me on Twitch, we were just reviewing my own videos that they were showing clips of. I mean, they weren't showing my videos, but all the clips that they were showing in the hearings are clips that are part of like my intro videos.
Another added, there was no new evidence. What can we expect from the Colorado Cold Case Review Team? Nothing. The Colorado Cold Case Review Team has spent the last year reviewing the JonBenet Ramsey homicide investigation to generate investigative recommendations, which the Boulder Police Department and the Boulder...
Wait a second. We need fucking, is it Paula Zahn? We need that cold case lady to come here because what they just said makes no sense.
Another added, there was no new evidence. What can we expect from the Colorado Cold Case Review Team? Nothing. The Colorado Cold Case Review Team has spent the last year reviewing the JonBenet Ramsey homicide investigation to generate investigative recommendations, which...
My ex-brother-in-law, I mean, it's less stupid than it sounds, but still, my ex-brother-in-law got his PhD. And what he did was went around to all like some of the worst areas in Baltimore and interviewed people. And his entire dissertation was trying to help identify the questions that should be asked to begin to figure out what questions and could get answers to begin to solve problems. It was like, you're not asking the questions to solve problems. You're asking the questions to decide what questions might possibly help to solve problems. Like, what? I get it. Being somebody that worked in like behavioral engineering and stuff, I get it. But still, like, imagine you would need another 2 more basic PhDs to get to a result.
The Boulder Police Department and the Boulder District Attorney are getting ready to act on. According to a case update published nearly 27 years to the day of Ramsey's murder, and more than a year since the Boulder Police Department's last statement. The tragic case is still in the hands of the department that bungled it in the first place.
What the hell is that?
Adolf Hitler was an intemperate...
Oh my God. We went from Ramsey to Hitler. I will say one good thing about Hitler. His last shot was his best shot. Okay, so let's get into this one. Whoops. Let's get into this one. This is from the actual The Ramsey Case YouTube channel. So we heard Karen Arndt tell us that she had to count the bullets because she knew somehow the killer she won't name was in the house and looked exactly like John Ramsey. Lou was hired to figure out and prove it was the Ramseys. And then when he realized he thought that was wrong, he got the boot. Oops. Oh my God. This must have been like converted from a VHS. Maybe even a beta.
He says these autopsy photos speak volumes.
Okay, wait.
I believe in intruders involved in this crime.
That's not a regular knot either. What kind of knot is that?
He says these autopsy photos speak volumes about the killer.
This man is a sadistic pedophile, and that he did take JonBenet from her bed by stun gunning her.
She's a great detective.
Is this a key to the case?
Unless some other evidence is presented to me, the most likely explanation for those injuries is that they were caused by a stun gun.
What about the ransom note?
Why would an intruder sit down and write a lengthy ransom note with no clue as to when the family was coming home?
And what about the Ramseys themselves?
There's evidence of
The
somebody.
knots were tied tight, but not against her wrists. Well, but depending on the type of knot, that might be then you can tighten and untighten that, can you?
doing this, and it's credible evidence.
So if the Ramseys didn't do it, will the real killer ever be caught?
I really believe that there's enough evidence left behind by our killer that we can catch him.
Tonight, the JonBenet murder, the intruder theory.
Here now is Katie Couric.
Okay, we can go fast.
Good evening. You may have thought you've heard it all about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, but tonight we'll be showing you evidence never televised before that may make you think twice about what you thought you knew. You'll hear from a well-respected detective who resigned from the case after 18 months because he says those in charge weren't listening to him. Tonight we are, as he takes us back to the crime scene, the house in Boulder, Colorado, where 6-year-old JonBenet was murdered, Christmas night, 1996.
I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it.
This is never-before-seen videotape of Patsy Ramsey on her third day of the police interrogation about the murder of her daughter, JonBenet.
It seems a little misleading to say that when this is like 18 months after the fact, not when it, like, normally when you show interrogation footage, it's assumed it happened like right at the time. But if you don't know, if you're not paying attention, you don't realize this isn't.
This child was the most precious thing in my life. And I can't stand the thought thinking somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows they might do it again to some other child.
Now, after 4.5 years, this man says there are important clues the police have ignored that he feels will exonerate the Ramseys after all.
Katie, the evidence shows very strongly that there's evidence of somebody else doing this, and it's credible evidence.
Thank God he doesn't have fucking crazy eyes.
That evidence includes this open window, this garrote, this suitcase, this footprint, these possible stun gun marks. Each taken alone might not mean much.
Yeah, so depending on where these locks are, even if it's on the side, I can understand now breaking one of the panes.
Suitcase, this footprint, these possible stun gun marks. Each taken alone might not mean much, but taken as a whole, Detective Lou Smith says, it's an altogether different story. A widely respected Colorado detective, he was at the center of the JonBenet investigation for a year and a half. Despite all you've heard since the murder, Smith claims the evidence shows someone other than John or Patsy Ramsey took the life of this 6-year-old girl.
I just can't turn my back on what I see to be the truth.
In Colorado law enforcement circles, Lou Smith is considered something of a legend. Boulder Sheriff's Department Detective Steve Ainsworth.
He takes the evidence and sees where the evidence goes. He's a tenacious investigator. A lot of people say he's the best there is.
The best there is, his supporters say.
A family member of the Ramseys?
Because of his 33-year career helping to solve more than 200 murder cases, including the killing of Colorado teenager Heather Dawn Church. Smith's investigation cleared the girl's father, who had been a suspect. An intruder was convicted of the crime. But Smith retired in the early 1990s, or so he thought. 3.5 months after JonBenet's murder, Smith was called back into action by the Boulder County District Attorney's Office.
I thought it was going to be a slam dunk, Katie. I thought this was going to be an
God damn.
Another day brings more tidbits of information. After all, he followed the early media coverage just like everyone else.
The Hendersons?
Ramseys were uncooperative with the police, that there were rumors.
The ones that owed 36 grand?
Of sexual abuse, that the ransom note was a fake, that there were no signs of forced entry, and he knew
The-
that in
the
the murder of a
criminals?
child, the parents are always prime suspects. According to the Justice Department, only 1 in 12 child murders is committed by a stranger. Lou Smith showed me around the Ramseys' former home in Boulder, now owned by friends who want this story told. Smith says once on the case, he quickly discovered he couldn't believe everything he had heard or seen, like the footage that seemed to show no evidence of an intruder the night of the murder.
I even thought to myself, how could anyone get into the house without leaving some type of a footprint in the snow?
But then he saw the actual crime scene photographs taken the morning after the murder.
And then once we got the...
Why would there even be a line saying there were no footprints in the snow when there was no snow?
photographs, then you could see that there was no snow around the various doors and entry doors of the house.
Or the sidewalks.
Or on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
yes.
you have a video about it. Where is it? Anyway, you have a video on it. Somewhere. It doesn't matter. You do have one. I'm sure of it. There's Lou and JonBenet with John Wesley. Oh, no, not him.
That's correct.
So the whole idea that no footprints meant no intruder to you was not necessarily true.
No, not once we've seen the photos.
But another crime.
I think I also heard it on which book am I listening to now? Hold on. Pull up my Audible. Perfect Murder, Perfect Town is the one I'm listening to now. And I already listened to was it the JonBenet one? Yeah, that's I listened to that one, and I only have a couple hours left of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town.
Crime scene photo had already caught his attention.
The very first photograph that I seen of that basement window, the window was wide open. And I said, wait a minute, take a look at that. That was one of the light bulbs that went off.
Is there a screen
The window
now?
was wide open. And I said,
That sure looks like a screen, but maybe not. Maybe it's just dark because the wall, and since it's a 2D photo, you wouldn't know the depth of that, like 30 inches or so.
wait a minute, take a look at that. That was one of the light bulbs that went off and one of the red flags that I seen.
Some thought the open window was irrelevant because no one could get through it. Or could they? Even Smith, who's 66 and 5'9", could pull it off.
Yes, I've been in there several times myself, and even a large person can get in there.
Why don't you show me how you believe it happened?
You notice, Katie, that this is an area that's real hidden from view. There's fences all around, and this is a perfect place to go in because nobody can see you.
It's not a perfect place to go in. There's an entire exposed backyard that's exposed to the bump out when you're getting in there. That is not an ideal place to go.
According to Smith, there are signs that someone had disturbed the leaves in the window well and of what he calls finger marks on one of the window panes, possibly from someone wearing a glove. He also points to what he believes to be a shoe scuff on the wall, and he says there are imprints of a high-tech brand boot, apparently not owned by any family member, in the wine cellar.
Oh, fuck. That makes sense. Watch this. Watch this. Watch what happens when he opens the window. I wonder if the murder was still in the house when the cops turned up. Interesting.
Wall, and he says there.
If the window was broken, right? If this upper thing was broken, it hits a stop. So if you pulled it open or pushed it open and it was already broke, I could see how it would jar pieces to come off. I couldn't make sense of it unless your hand did it, but that makes so much more sense. The window is impeded.
There are imprints of a high-tech brand boot, apparently not
They definitely didn't have the alarm on. They didn't use the alarm. What up, Dagnus?
owned by any family member in the wine cellar where Jean.
Well, so that's what we were talking about earlier. I didn't think about the fact that it wasn't one pane of glass and that these are 4 individuals. So I didn't understand how somebody of his means would have allowed all the elements to just come pouring in a house. But if it was one of the upper panes, they almost never would weather get in there.
And he says there are imprints of a high-tech brand boot, apparently not owned by any family member, in the wine cellar where JonBenet's body was found. And he says
that
a
is
suitcase
pretty
placed
easy
under the window to help an intruder get out. Wouldn't there have been footprints then on the suitcase?
To me, I do see an area that looks
Well,
like
Fleet said he picked it up and put it on there. So it wasn't actually found on top of there. Fleet said when he walked through the first time, he put it there. Why he did that? But would an intruder that knows the house well enough to know where the pad and pen are, or an intruder that knew enough about the house to have already swiped the pad and pen previously.
a very partial footprint.
But the intruder theory still raises many questions. If someone were in their home, how could John and Patsy Ramsey not have heard anything from their bedroom while their daughter was dying?
Well, we looked at that when you look at the schematics of the house. There are, this is the least open floor plan of any house I've ever seen in my life. And I was a realtor. So with all the walls and all the doors, I don't know how you would hear somebody, not even in that little room. If they were in like the train room, you wouldn't hear them.
Violent death. A neighbor across the street reported hearing a fairly shocking child's cry between midnight and 2 a.m.
Yes, that's correct.
Many have said, if that's the case, then why didn't John and Patsy Ramsey hear it as well?
And that's a very good question to ask.
On the window
Smith
ledge,
says he has
okay.
an answer, and it has to do with the unusual design of the Ramsey home. He says
Gotcha.
his parents would have heard nothing because JonBenet was murdered all the way down in the basement.
So then there were multiple pieces of glass, which still makes sense. Now that I see how the window would open, even if you decided I've got to get out this window for some reason or another, then it would make sense that it would break.
Floors below. But how did a neighbor hear a scream that the parents did not? Smith points to a vent pipe in the basement boiler room, where he says the most brutal part of the attack took place.
That's not the boiler room.
It has an open end in the basement and also an open end to the outside. It acts almost like a megaphone. Myself and other investigators have stood in the basement.
Is that? I mean, I know the other room is right on the other side, but.
And whistled and yelled, and you can hear it clearly at the Stanton residence, and could barely hear it upstairs.
Yeah, we're gonna watch that
We
video
walked upstairs
too.
to John and Patsy Ramsey's former bedroom. This is where John and Patsy Ramsey's bed was, and
Paula
if the intruder
Woodward's book.
theory has any legs, then you believe they wouldn't hear the scream that the neighbor across the
Good
street
shit.
heard.
That's correct. And if you'll also notice, even the windows on the side, they're very thick, double-strength windows. And there's no window on that particular side of the house where the scream would exit out that vent.
But even if you accept all that, there's another question. When would an intruder have had time to get into the house without anyone knowing? On Christmas Day, late in the afternoon, John and Patsy Ramsey took JonBenet and their son Burke to a Christmas party at the home of friends.
Yeah, I think they were in there long before they got home.
The Ramseys were not home for several hours and say they returned around 9:30 that night. Lou Smith believes that the intruder came in while the Ramseys were out at that party. Not sure exactly how long the intruder lay in wait, Smith believes the killer would have climbed these back stairs from the basement, might have hidden in an extra bedroom on the second floor, and later entered John.
Well, the risk of getting caught is part of the process. Like, first of all, you don't really do crimes without the risk of getting caught, but whether this was ritualistic and the Ramseys knew, whether it was some similar and they didn't know, what, like, all of it. But I just don't see how you would write the note after the event. That seems nonsensical to me. I mean, you didn't come up with that note out of your fucking mind, right? Like, this probably wasn't the first draft, even though, oh no, they were the rough draft. And you forget all that. The idea of the way the note was written isn't free-flowing thought.
JonBenet's room after the entire family had fallen asleep.
People say that there was only 4 people in the house that day. What the case tells me is that there's a 5th personality there. There's
At
a
least.
personality that is a very brutal, vicious personality. That
Yeah, 4:30, 9:30, yep.
Smith says he was further convinced his intruder theory had merit because he could not find
Yeah.
any motive for a Ramsey family
The Astro van and the Jaguar.
member to kill JonBenet.
There was no.
Which, my question is, what kind of van did the church have? What vehicles did St. John's own?
Past behavior on the Ramseys' part, after 4 years and everybody in the world looking at them, that shows that the Ramseys had any motive to kill their daughter, or that they would go off the deep end.
But in your experience, don't good people sometimes do just
My
terrible
God, my face reminds me of puberty.
thing? What about when people just, for whatever reason, snap?
Yes, that does happen.
And they are sort of model citizens, church-going, good people, solid individuals. Everybody loves them, great neighbors.
Katie, you're absolutely
Lights
right.
on and off. I didn't hear about that.
But usually when you look into the background of those cases, there is a pathology there of some type. In a Ramsey's case, I can't find any pathology at all.
I mean, it sure seems like the flashlight was like one of those 5 D-cell battery flashlights, which is a cop flashlight.
But Steve Thomas, a former detective
Legs
with the Boulder Police
bound? No, I don't
Department,
believe
had another
so.
theory about the way JonBenet was murdered and wrote a book about it. He alleges the little girl wet her bed that night, causing Patsy Ramsey to fly into a rage and kill her daughter. It's been said that because JonBenet wet her bed,
Well, when they show what it is, they make those in like a passenger van version.
Patsy Ramsey flew into a fit of rage.
There's never been any record at all of Patsy ever losing her temper over JonBenet's bedwetting. None whatsoever.
Well, how would anyone know, frankly?
The family would know. The friends would probably know.
Well, if nobody knows and people have said it didn't happen, why would you assume it did happen?
They would probably tell somebody if there was some type of pathology there. The housekeepers would know.
What's more, Smith says the crime scene evidence disputes the bedwetting allegation.
The photographs show that
On
there is
before
no bedwetting.
5
The photographs show
years.
no staining of those sheets.
Interesting.
Lab reports don't show any bedwetting or the sheets being urine stained.
So if Patsy Ramsey didn't fly into a fit of rage and kill her daughter that night, how did this murder unfold? According to Lou Smith, the violence began with a weapon like this.
The stun gun is a very important part of this puzzle, and it points very strongly at an intruder.
When we return, Smith's stun gun theory and the kind of man he believes would have used it.
JonBenet was a pedophile's dream come true.
Continues.
At home with her family on Christmas morning 1996, the last morning of her life, JonBenet Ramsey looked like any innocent, carefree 6-year-old. But when most of us hear the name JonBenet, we think of this, the tiny beauty queen.
JonBenet, thank you.
In the weeks and months following this murder, many people saw
That's wild.
videotape of JonBenet over and over again, and they thought, this is a little sick to dress this little girl
sorry,
up
it's a little
in
soft.
high heels and makeup and have her prance around in clothes that frankly looked almost inappropriate. Is that a fair observation to make about this family, that that's a little sick or not?
I don't think that is fair.
Would you agree that that contributed to the perception that the Ramseys might have been involved?
Absolutely. I'm not saying all the world, but the majority of the people perceive the Ramseys to be guilty, not because of evidence, but because of perception.
But whatever people think, the fact that JonBenet was highly visible plays a critical role in Lou Smith's intruder theory. Smith says she may have become the object of a sexual predator's fantasy.
She's a beautiful girl. She did special performances just before Christmas, not only in her school, but she was also in a very highly publicized event of the Christmas season. JonBenet had her own float, Little Miss Colorado. JonBenet was a pedophile's dream come true.
In fact, soon after the murder, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department child abuse expert Lieutenant Tom Circle told NBC News that public exposure like this raises the risk of a child being targeted.
I've searched hundreds of homes, residents, businesses of child molesters, child pornographers, and found pictures of kids from around the world. And when you see some ads or you see photographs of minor children where they're posed in a sexy way, it's fuel for a child molester.
This is home video taken in a Boulder shopping mall a few days before Christmas, JonBenet's last public performance. Her parents were public too. John Ramsey's business success was reported in the local paper just days before Christmas. The Ramseys had hosted 3 Christmas parties that month involving hundreds of people. 2 of them were held in their home.
The Ramseys were highly visible at the time of the murder.
But if Lou Smith's theory of an intruder is true, who was this individual?
This is a brutal, brutal murder. The type of killing and the brutality of the killing show me that this man is a sadistic pedophile.
But how did he get away with murder as JonBenet's family slept in the same house? In a crucial part of his theory, Smith believes the intruder got JonBenet from her bed by incapacitating her with a stun gun, a small battery-operated device designed to fend off attackers. Smith says the killer then took the child to the basement.
I believe he brought her down to the farthest, deepest part of that basement and did very brutal things to her.
These autopsy photos provided to NBC News show that JonBenet had 2 distinct sets of marks on her face and back.
Stun gun marks are very specific, very specific. Once you know what they look like, it's not...
Well, no, you got Burke, first of all. And I think there's another one, but I'm not sure about that. What's funny is there is a John Ramsey that works for I think the government up in West Virginia, and I don't know if it's the same one. For reported seeing the Astra van. Yeah.
Not hard to distinguish what they are.
Speculation about a stun gun has been swirling around ever since JonBenet was murdered. The Boulder Police Department has neither confirmed nor denied its use in this crime, but the department did ask Dr. Michael Doberson, a forensic pathologist and coroner, to study the marks on JonBenet.
Unless some other evidence is presented to me, the most likely explanation for those injuries is that they were caused by a stun gun.
And Lou Smith uses these photos to further advance his theory. This man, whose body was exhumed, was confirmed to have been stun gunned on his face, and this young woman was stun gunned on her face as well. He says their marks are similar to the ones found on JonBenet.
You have to explain the fresh marks on JonBenet, especially on her face. They weren't seen in any of the Christmas photos or any of the photographs taken
older
that day of
son.
JonBenet. This is a very...
See, where my chat is, that little heart thing where you can hit the little different emotes covers up the last like word of the first line or whatever line it's on. So I saw O and I thought it said only and it says older.
Very important clue left behind by the killer, Katie. You just can't throw a clue like that away.
Smith says there aren't many other explanations and does not believe they were caused by buttons or snaps, as others have theorized.
Not only do the marks on the back look like each other, but they're a certain distance apart, approximately 3.5 centimeters apart. The marks on the face are approximately 3.5 centimeters apart.
That's
what are the odds of having 2 sets of marks on a person just by randomly laying on an object, say as a button or anything of that nature, or a snap?
There is no evidence the Ramseys ever owned a stun gun, but hundreds of thousands of Americans do. More than 600 police departments use them, and they're easily available at gun stores and on the internet. They don't need to be registered. And Lou Smith says he did extensive research on the weapons. He found one he says would most closely match the marks on JonBenet, an air taser gun applied directly to the skin. Some people aren't very familiar with stun guns, certainly don't know the noise they make, and so I'd like you to show us if you could.
First of all, the stun gun does make a lot of noise.
I don't think that pillow gave consent.
So how could the Ramseys sleep through that? Lou Smith says he now knows because he conducted tests on anesthetized pigs.
Until we got to the actual experiments
That's so
with the
fucked
pigs,
up. That's the part that bothers me about this.
we didn't realize that a stun gun, when
We
it's
fucked up
applied
a pig.
right directly to the skin of the pig, that noise is very muted. This is what it sounds like when it's against a pillow. It's very muted when it's against the skin. That's what it sounds like.
Sounds the
Even more
same
so
to me.
when it was on the pig.
It sounds the same to me.
But as much as Lou Smith believes his stun gun theory is relevant, he says it certainly didn't win many converts at the Boulder Police Department. So why were people so hesitant about accepting this stun gun theory?
I suppose it's because it didn't fit into the promoting the Ramseys did it part of the equation.
I mean, did they give another answer? Did they ever say that these marks came from something else? You can't just say it's not a stun gun and then not have what it is.
Some people have called you a delusional old man.
I like to look at it as being a seasoned investigator. I know that,
No,
that was said early on in the
was kidding
investigation.
around.
If that's the case, I must have changed overnight, because that has not been the case in the past.
Lou Smith supporters say he's onto something. Up next, new details about the way he believes JonBenet died. Was the garrote used for some kind of weird sexual act, or was it used as a killing device?
I think it was both.
And now we return to the JonBenet murder, the intruder theory.
Okay.
Here again.
All right. I'm going to...
It was both.
And now we return to the...
How does he break the window with his foot? Could he have kicked the upper window with his foot while standing at the top?
Used as a killing device.
I think it was both.
I think if you tried to kick the upper pane from there, you would torque your shin off those bricks, which you would never forget. I've had people shin check me my fair share of times. That shit hurts like fuck. I mean, maybe you could, if you turn like, I don't know.
And now we return to the JonBenet murder, the intruder theory.
That bothers
Here again,
me.
Katie Couric.
As we return to Detective Lou Smith's theory about an intruder in the Ramsey murder case, he describes what he says was a sexual predator's horrific
Well,
attack
that's what
on a
bothers
6-year-old
me too. How many windows have you broken in your life? Like, if I broke a window, I would know how I broke it. Like, that doesn't seem like an easy to forget thing. Like, where did I park the car?
girl. A note of caution. Some of what you're about
Like,
to
it's
see...
both. If he would have said, I did it with my foot, but he said, I think I did it. Maybe I kicked it. Like, how do you not fucking know?
And here is graphic and disturbing.
Why he did all these things, I don't know. But JonBenet died a very brutal death in the furthest corner of the basement of that house. And then she was thrown into a moldy room.
Wait, did she die in the basement?
Katie, this area is
I mean,
blocked
did she
off
die
now,
in the
but this used to be
corner?
a door that led into the wine cellar.
And this is where JonBenet's body was
That's where her body was found. And it's only a very short distance from here to there.
Lou Smith says once the intruder got JonBenet into the wine cellar, he used a carefully made garrote fashioned from nylon.
Okay. This garrote, I think, is a huge clue. The way I'm looking at it, right? Maybe all that paint was missing before, but I thought it was like an all brown paintbrush. I could be wrong. I could have seen something that wasn't actually like from the same box or whatever, but ignore all that. If you think of a garrote, anybody that I know that knew what a garrote was assumed it was a two-handle garrote. Urine stain found on the carpet right outside that door. Okay. Which I believe happens during asphyxiation, but I'm not sure that's true, but the thing about this garrote, it's not a two-handle garrote. Because in my mind, when you think about how this crime would have gone, a two-handed garrote gives you way less control of the other person. A one-handed garrote tightens by twisting with one hand. So you can control a body and potentially you could have your hand inside of the rope where it's tied on a hand, or this could feed through that and still bind the person in a way where they can't fight back. Maybe both hands were in it at one point. Like, the way this garrote is made, the type of like extensive wraparound knot, that's not normal. Like, if you think last minute, I hurt my daughter, I'm gonna stage a crime scene. But I'm going to challenge myself by staging the most difficult crime scene I can. Like, this has all the markings of somebody that's done this before. This isn't like a random, I've never created this thing before, and this is how I'm going to do it. This person has practiced this, has done it before. This is not the first time they've ever made one of these. That's my opinion.
On cord and a broken paintbrush taken from this tray in the basement. And if there were ever any doubts about how brutal the murder was...
If you look up... I don't Google things on screen, but... you won't be able to see that. You can see this. When you look up garrote, these are the first styles that come up. Like, here's the one I think of. But every other garrote that shows up is not what you and I would think of. So, like, this was a torture device, not a strangulation device. I mean, it does both. It does both. That's the whole purpose. So, like, this is what I think of. But apparently, like, look, all of these. And if the idea wasn't just murder, it would make way more sense.
These autopsy photos provided to NBC News lay them to rest.
This final garrote positioning is very deeply embedded in the neck of JonBenet.
Lou Smith believes she was strangled first, that the fingernail marks around the ligature suggest she was conscious and struggling at the time. Was the garrote used for some kind of weird sexual
I mean, I don't believe this was ever a kidnapping. But it also might not have been an intended murder. I don't know. I just don't know. Like, there's a rumor about the person that normally applied the garrote for the people that did this, that person like died or was like went away. And this is the first time the new person was in charge. I don't know anything about that, but that's a story that has been said.
Or was it used
This just feels ritualistic to me.
Device.
I think it was both. He was fantasizing about using this on JonBenet. He placed it around her neck, he was controlling her, and violently applied it to strangle her. And she was trying to get it off of her neck.
The autopsy photos also show a large skull fracture, and Smith says this grievous injury actually occurred.
Okay, wait, I haven't actually seen that before.
Her neck.
The autopsy.
How the fuck do you not penetrate skin with this? Again, there's one way I think you do this without penetrating the skin. Personally tend to believe it was not a kidnapping gone wrong, but it was a murder revenge gone right. I do find that an interesting theory. It seems just as valid to me. Here's the thing about this crack, though. Seeing it again, if you had a device like the garrote, like one of these, and you were applying pressure like that to a point on the skull, then I can see it not just cracking a spot, but when it would fail, it would crack like a rock. Like the rock would when you were to split a rock, the whole fucking thing comes. And that's what it seems like to me, that maybe it wasn't a strike of a thing, but it was a sustained pressure, which would make sense of why there's no, like, open skin.
Photos also show a large skull fracture, and Smith says this grievous injury actually occurred toward the end of the attack.
The person who did this wanted to brutally kill JonBenet. That was probably one of the last things that this person did prior to throwing her in that room.
Dr. Michael Doberson, a Colorado coroner...
Prior to throwing her in that room. Key phrase. They killed her prior to throwing her in that room.
...was asked by the Boulder Police Department to examine the autopsy photos of JonBenet. He concurs with Smith and says she was struck on the head after she was strangled. Why? He says such a blow to the head would normally result in much more internal bleeding in the brain. But because the garrote cut off blood supply to the brain, it kept bleeding there to a minimum.
I would disagree with the theory of the Boulder Police that any of the changes that are seen at autopsy associated with the ligature strangulation are staged in any way.
Smith says this photo of the nylon rope found on JonBenet's hands is another important clue.
Okay. Hands. Multiple. It is the one on the bottom. What is that? You could have two hands in that thing, right? That definitely looks like a knot that would loosen and tighten. Not so much this one, but this one.
The way that the ligature on her hands was constructed, again, is a fantasy in the mind of this killer. This wasn't just tied on her wrist with little granny knots on both sides and the rope tied her.
And in a key element of his theory, Smith says JonBenet was the victim of a sexual assault. Remember this paint tray from which Smith claims the killer took the paintbrush to fashion the garrote? He believes the end...
That one's the same light brown.
...that paintbrush was used to sexually assault the little girl.
JonBenet was sexually penetrated that night. Somebody went between her legs and put something there with such force that it caused her to bleed. There was, in her vagina, what has been suspected to be maybe even a small piece of that broken paintbrush.
Smith believes the rest of that piece of broken paintbrush was taken by the intruder as a souvenir.
The paintbrush is actually broken into three pieces. There's a brush end, which is found in the basement. There's a middle portion, which is found in the handle of the garrote. And there's a third portion of that paintbrush, which is missing. It has not been found in the house.
Smith says all these things added together point to an intruder, not a family member committing the crime.
Now, why a family member would have to take their child down to a dirty, filthy, cluttered basement and murder her in the farthest reaches of this basement, sure, you can say it could happen, but the chances of that happening, I believe, are extremely remote.
Isn't there always the first time?
Sure, there's the first time.
Settle down, Katie.
But again, it would have to be a first time for everything in this case, if that was the case.
Yeah, exactly. They wrote a one-of-a-kind kidnap note. The one of, like, a rare, like, not seen garrote.
The theory that somehow this was some kind of...
Is that Katie Kirk, or is that, like, three midgets in a jacket with a Katie Kirk head?
Perverse sexual act committed by John Ramsey.
Sure.
That went awry.
If you look at the end of the branch, you could say that anything is possible. But you have to also look at a man's past history. There is absolutely no...
Well, wouldn't they have found it in the trash? Or did Patsy know that they had to somehow flush it down the toilet?
Even a hint of any type of sexual impropriety on the part of John Ramsey.
JonBenet's autopsy report mentions chronic inflammation in her vagina. Some medical experts have said
that doesn't mean anything.
This could be a sign of long-term abuse. Others say the inflammation could have been caused by almost anything, including bubble baths.
Yes.
There's no debate there are pieces of evidence left at the crime scene. Fibers, hair, and DNA. Evidence Smith says doesn't match up with anyone in the Ramsey family.
It can point a very strong finger at who may have done it. Also, they found DNA in JonBenet's panties. She had bled during the sexual assault portion of the crime. Again, primary source, they know that's JonBenet. It was her blood. But there was also secondary source of DNA. Again, foreign, and it matches the DNA in the fingernails of her hands. This is now in 3 areas.
When you say foreign, it means not belonging to John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey.
That's right.
And Smith points to a single hair found on the blanket covering JonBenet's body.
Could it just be a random hair? Sure. But could it be the killer? Yes.
This hair did not belong to any of the Ramseys.
That's right.
There were reports that there were red fibers found on
Wait, who
JonBenet that
did?
matched a sweater
Who tore it out?
Patsy Ramsey was wearing.
Yes, Patsy Ramsey was sitting on the same blanket probably that night when she changed JonBenet's clothing. I'm not saying that you should throw this evidence away. You just have to give it the weight that it's supposed to. And in court, if it ever would go to court, this
I
is
hear
argued
you.
back and forth.
But so far, no one has been tried for this crime. And Smith claims what's crucial in catching the killer is the evidence he says JonBenet's murderer did not leave behind. The piece of broken paintbrush, the stun gun, and the duct tape that was used to cover her mouth. When we return, Lou Smith's take on perhaps the single most important piece of evidence used to implicate Patsy Ramsey in the murder of her daughter.
The person that wrote that note shows his personality in that note. Very brutal and very vicious.
He says he. Lou keeps saying he.
To our Katie Couric special.
Like, when it comes to Lou, that's the only way, like, I can understand what he's thinking. Because he's explaining his theory while not trying to divulge too much, but there's certain phrases and, like, he's using he, not as, like, the general he, any gender.
The intruder theory.
Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We have your daughter in our possession. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Chilling words from the JonBenet Ramsey ransom note, reportedly found by Patsy Ramsey on these stairs inside their home.
She came down these stairs and seen a ransom note on the bottom step.
4.5 years later, the note remains perhaps the most critical and perplexing piece of evidence in the ongoing murder investigation.
The person that wrote that note shows his personality in that note. Very brutal and very vicious.
According to Smith, a number of phrases from the note are taken from movies with storylines that revolve around kidnapping and murder. A case of life imitating art. Movies like Ruthless People.
If you deviate from our instructions in any way whatsoever, she will be killed.
Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. A phrase from the Ramsey ransom note. And
this note is as plagiarized as Melania's speech that she stole from Michelle.
From the movie Speed.
Do not attempt to grow a brain.
Compared to Don't Try to Grow a Brain in the Ramsey ransom note. And Smith points out the movie Ransom was playing in Boulder at the time, a film with eerie similarities to JonBenet's murder. A 6-year-old boy is kidnapped, his mouth covered with duct tape, his hands tied.
Whoever wrote this note was thinking of those particular type of movies. It's like a PhD in ransom notes that was gained through watching movies.
Smith acknowledges that while the author apparently practiced writing the note while inside the home, he also believes the writer had a definite idea of what he wanted to say.
The note itself shows that this was a very controlled, planned, sophisticated ransom note. It's not like a note is written in panic after brutally murdering your child. Why would a parent have to write a 2.5-page ransom note? Why would they have to put in all of these references to ransom-type movies?
Why? To cover up their own crime.
Sure. If they're a sophisticated criminal, I can see them doing that, Katie. These people do not have any type of criminal record at all.
Smith believes it was a sophisticated criminal who entered the home through this basement window while the Ramseys were at a Christmas party. Perhaps one of the most frequently asked questions, Lou, is why would an intruder sit down and write a lengthy ransom note with no clue as to when the family was coming home? I mean, wouldn't that be awfully risky?
Well, if the
Is that the dumbest question I've ever heard? Is that really what she asked?
Lou, is why would an window while the sit down and write a lengthy ransom? One of the most frequently asked questions, Lou, is why would an intruder sit down and write a lengthy ransom note with no clue as to when the family was coming home?
Why would a better question? Let's take a step back, Katie. Why would somebody be sitting in the home, not knowing when they were coming home? Like, whether they're sitting somewhere writing a letter or sitting somewhere not writing a letter, they're still sitting in the home. It's the exact same risk. What the fuck are you talking about?
I mean, wouldn't that be awfully risky?
Well, if the intruder had plenty of time in the house to begin with, he would have all the time he needed to write a ransom note. There's a certain type of high-risk criminal that does that.
It's part of the thrill?
It's part of the thrill, you bet. And I think when we finally catch him, which I think we still have a very good chance to do, that we're going to find that he's been arrested for some type of sexual offense in his past.
If an intruder wrote this ransom note, was this a kidnapping gone bad?
What I found in the majority of the cases I've worked is there's a very simple rule. The case is as it seems to be. Don't make it complicated. If it's reported as a kidnapping and a murder, perhaps it is a kidnapping and a murder.
Boulder Sheriff's Detective Steve Ainsworth, who worked the Ramsey investigation, has his theories. Many people say, how could an intruder hang around the house and write this long, elaborate ransom note? That's pretty risky stuff.
Very risky.
How do you answer that?
Could be part of the thrill for him. The risk of getting caught.
Why write the ransom note then?
He could have been a pedophile who didn't want any money, but he wanted JonBenet.
There's one section that some believe points a finger at John and Patsy Ramsey. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account.
Here's my understanding of this $118,000 that was the Christmas bonus. It was the Christmas bonus from 1995 that was paid in January of 96, which remains as a bonus on your pay stub all year. So, like, they make it sound like he just got this bonus, but it sounds like my understanding is he had the bonus for like 12 months.
$100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills.
Chocolate box.
$118,000 has been the source of a lot of attention because that was the amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. Is that right?
It was close to what the net amount was.
So people think, where did that number come from?
Yes, and why would they put in a figure that would point right back at themselves? We don't know why the killer put that in his note.
But
could the killer have been an employee or have had some...
If the number would be pointing back at themselves, that's the same logic you got to assign to the Hendersons.
Association with Access Graphics, John Ramsey's company. Did John or Patsy Ramsey purposely try to implicate a disgruntled employee? Smith says both are possible, but that the relatively small amount of money demanded remains a mystery to him. According to investigators, handwriting analyses have ruled out John Ramsey as the writer of the note. Patsy Ramsey could not be completely ruled out, though.
No, Patsy Ramsey cannot be completely ruled out. She does have certain characteristics which are close in nature to that on the note. But what some of the examiners have said, and the majority of them, is that there are many more differences. In other words, it's not a positive at all that Patsy Ramsey wrote that note.
In fact, it's measured from 1 to 5, and she scored a 4.5, unlikely to have written the note.
Yes.
Which leaves a 0.5 possibility that she did.
Absolutely. There's a 0.5 possibility.
On a 1 to 5 scale, that would mean there's a 90% chance someone else wrote the ransom note.
It starts out Mr. Ramsey, which I think we're getting.
Is this the attorney? He's got to be the attorney because that's not how a cop would sit. There was no shot a cop would have that kind of closed body position. That's got to be the attorney who's trying to protect her, which the body position makes more sense. And the only reason that the crossed arms means anything to me is because when I used to teach sales training, I would explain, when you first meet people or when they first come in, if it's a higher ticket item, they'll literally have the closed off protective behavior. And you metaphorically, your goal is to just get them to a point where they're open enough. Ex-employee Jeff Merrick. Oh, Merrick is said to have ties to that 118 ransom demand. He is said to have threatened Ramsey, but I don't see how he profited from this trip to Muth.
Kidnapper is pretty polite. Do you find that at all unusual?
Is that the attorney?
Smith says he believes that gives his intruder theory even more credence. The Boulder Police Department
I have started this thing.
Always contended it has investigated all leads, yet Smith insists the police never really pursued the intruder theory.
The Boulder Police Department has focused on the Ramseys. Some people call it tunnel vision. Perhaps that's the case. They have just stopped at the Ramseys. Plain and simple. They've gone to the Ramseys and they've stopped.
But Lou Smith has been accused of being too much on the Ramsey side. One beef about you is that at one point you prayed with the Ramseys, that you're a religious individual, that they're religious, and that somehow that clouded your judgment.
I know, I've read that also. It is part of my personality and the way I work a case. When I pull on the crime scene, the first thing I say is a prayer.
So I've started this this mapping, but it takes me a while. When this is done, we'll be able to fill it in, adding details of each person. Prosecutor for the DA. Interesting. And that looked like Lou questioning her, but might not have been. Yeah, so I started doing this. Like, here's family members, friends, police. I think this is the DA's office. It's not color coded yet. But this is what I need to be able to like start to draw the connections. Like, I'm just adding the people to the map right now. Yeah. You know my thoughts on Christianity.
When I end a case, that's the last thing I do.
They look a lot alike.
I started my day at the Ramsey
Damn,
home.
we got to get in contact. We got to get in contact because this is great. I'm glad you're here.
With a commitment to JonBenet and a small prayer. The way that it happened with my praying with the Ramseys was completely spontaneous. I did mention to John that I just said a small prayer for JonBenet, and he asked me if I'd say a prayer with him. And I said, sure, John, I'd be glad to do that.
I mean, I think it's strange as fuck to think a cop saying a prayer with a father, a victim, and a potential suspect. I don't understand what part of that seems funny.
And there was probably two reasons for that. One, I would offer compassion to this family, and that's my style of doing things. But the second reason is I wanted to build a bridge with the Ramseys,
like that,
so that they would come across and supply information to the police department and to the district attorney's office later. It's not the first time I've done that, Katie. We're just going to go get some more equipment. All right.
Others say Smith is reliving a case from his past when a father was suspected of murdering his teenage daughter.
This is what kills me. The Boulder police, who can't solve shit, when Lou said you're wrong, they said, nah, Lou is just too wrapped up in how he solved this other case. Except my dude had like a 90+% clearance rate. So was he just lucky all the other times?
He was eventually cleared after Smith investigated and found an intruder was responsible. Some have said that because of the Heather Dawn Church case, that you are sort of intruder obsessed, and that you, in fact, are the myopic one.
If the evidence is there, Katie, that's what I
Yeah,
follow.
I mean, they went to church. How could they have done anything wrong?
In the Heather Dawn Church case, there was an intruder. At first, the parents were blamed for that crime, too.
When it comes to the Ramsey case, Smith says he is not being paid by anyone, but continues to work it on his own. The Ramseys have assembled their own team of investigators who have worked on the case on their behalf, paid by them.
Yes.
And you have worked with them at times. Is that kosher in your line of work, or for what you're doing, to be working in concert with people who are on the Ramsey payroll?
Yes, I have no problem with that at all.
I wanted to make a joke about her saying kosher being anti-Semitic, but I couldn't even come up with one.
The goal is to find the killer of JonBenet. And if I have to work with the Ramsey investigators to do that, I'm going to do that.
When we return, Lou Smith's intruder theory. Are other experts buying it?
The JonBenet murder. The intruder theory continues.
I have it on 1.5 speed, and I barely notice until I see them walk. When I see them walk, it looks funny as hell.
Again, Katie Couric.
There are countless law enforcement officials, journalists, and millions of curious Americans who have followed every twist and turn in the JonBenet murder case. Not surprisingly, Lou Smith's theory has reignited the debate over just who killed the 6-year-old girl. You believe he familiarized In recent days, even some skeptics say Lou Smith's intruder theory is an impressive piece of detective work. Investigative journalist Lawrence Schiller, who interviewed scores of participants in the case, is the author.
Are these floorboard heaters? I don't know if you can see them well enough. Are those... Did this house not have ductwork? Like, I know there's an old section and a new section. Does this place have baseboard heating?
It's a piece of detective work. Investigative journalist Lawrence Schiller, who interviewed scores of participants in the case,
That would lend even more to not hearing the yells. If there was no ductwork leading through the house, the idea of you would hear the yelling is like no shot without ductwork.
Author of a best-selling book about the JonBenet murder.
There is no question that Mr. Smith's scenario, the way he puts his presentation together, is very, very powerful. It could sway a jury. It certainly did sway the grand jury that did not indict the Ramseys.
But Schiller...
Well, that's not exactly what happened. My understanding of the grand jury is, since their job is, if there's 50% plus one, then you're supposed to issue the indictment on that. But the grand juror said there's no way they would have gotten convicted on what we said they should get indicted on.
Mueller says the Boulder police have already considered much of Smith's intruder theory.
And they have either discarded it or lowered it on the ladder of importance for various reasons. And they're not going to make their reasons public because they're still involved in an investigation.
While officials with the Boulder Police Department declined to be interviewed, last week they did issue a statement which said investigators have interviewed more than 600 people, 140 of them possible suspects. And the police say the case and the evidence have changed significantly since Smith left 2.5 years ago.
We learned that. We learned that in the what's her name case in Kentucky. That was shot in her house, not in her bed, in the hallway. Fuck, what's her name? Not Tamir Rice, the other one.
Its interpretation of the evidence.
It's not an open and shut case on these marks now.
On Smith's theory about a stun gun, Dr. Robert Stratbucker is a consultant for the company that makes air taser stun guns. He says he cannot completely rule out stun gun marks on JonBenet's back, but is nearly certain the marks on her face were caused by something else.
There is evidence of charring here. Almost looks like a burn. Stun gun marks with
Breonna Taylor. Yeah, thanks.
Without exception, never cause burns.
As to Smith's claim that lab reports and photos show no evidence that JonBenet wet the bed that night, sources close to the Boulder police say later tests did show traces of urine. And about Smith's theory on the timing of the severe injuries to JonBenet, at our request, the chief medical examiner of Riverside County, California.
If she wet the bed, you're not going to find traces of urine.
Dr. Joseph Cohen reviewed the JonBenet autopsy report and photos. He says they are inconclusive.
I do not agree with Mr. Smith's conclusion that there's a specific sequence to the blunt force head trauma and the ligature strangulation. It's my belief that that separation cannot be made based on the autopsy findings.
And what about the evidence such as the footprints?
He's not saying, but maybe he kind of is.
The open window, the suitcase, even the DNA. Lauren Schiller says the Boulder Police Department feels there's no way to tell if those pieces of evidence date from the night of the murder.
They've looked at all the evidence, the open window, the suitcase, the scuff mark on the wall, the fibers on the blanket, the DNA in her fingernails and panties and on her hands, and they feel that you can't date that evidence.
One of the few things that can be dated is the ransom note. Patsy Ramsey says she found it on the stairs the morning after the murder. It's considered perhaps the most critical.
Here's what's funny. If they think she killed her kid, why do they trust that she found the note in a certain place? It's a fact that we have to trust Patsy on this, but also Patsy's a murderer.
Critical piece of evidence.
The fact that the offender felt compelled to write this note goes to staging and creating a false motive and trying to deflect the investigation.
Former FBI profiler Greg McCrary says Smith's theory that a sexual predator would leave a ransom note makes no sense. He asks, was it a sex crime or a kidnapping for money? McCrary says only in staged situations do you see multiple motives, hoping one will stick. But another former FBI profiler, John Douglas, says Lou Smith's intruder theory is solid. Douglas was hired as a consultant by John Ramsey's attorneys in the early days of the case. From the start, he thought an intruder was responsible, especially because of the way JonBenet's body was discovered.
If the crime scene was staged, why would you then have a family member like John Ramsey on stage the crime scene? If he killed his daughter and placed her in that wine cellar with Patsy Ramsey, he wouldn't have been the one to find his daughter. He would have been the one on stage the crime scene by removing duct tape from the mouth and loosening ligatures around the wrist of his child, and then carrying the child who's in full rigor upstairs and placing the child down on the floor. He wouldn't have done that. He would have left it there like a prop so that others could find the child.
Rocky Mountain News reporter Lisa Rickman, who's covered the case from the beginning, says Smith's theory is credible because he has no financial motivation and is beholden to no one.
How do you explain mystery DNA in her panties that also matches the DNA under her fingernails?
So, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, this is One Solve's video that talks about the Hendersons, who apparently embezzled from the company, and each of them owed $18,000. So there's a whole video on that, which we're not going to get to today, though.
That belongs to a male individual who is not a member of her own family.
Police were suspicious of the Ramseys from the beginning, citing, among other things, their behavior after the crime, the ransom note, and their apparent lack of cooperation when it came to a formal police interview. I mean, if I'm a parent and I want to find out who murdered my child, God forbid,
what up, Glitch?
I would
Who's
do everything
Edward Wayne Edwards?
In my power
Was that
to
his
help
name?
the police help solve the case.
Yes, Katie, but you would also go by what your lawyers advised you.
Do you think their lawyers did them a disservice in some ways by protecting them?
Dude, that is so stupid to me. The cops are telling you from day one they knew immediately this was John Ramsey. Or is it crazy? Did he fucking...
Shut the fuck up. You don't say a fucking word. You know what you do? You shut the fuck up.
Too much, at least in the court of public opinion?
Yes, from the court of public opinion, that is a perception. But from the lawyer's perception is they were trying to keep their clients out of jail.
What would you do if evidence surfaced that basically convicted John and Patsy Ramsey?
118,000 is strangely similar to I just need 11,780. That sounds very similar.
I would applaud it because the case would be solved.
Fester committing every crime, every history. Okay.
Real surprised that there would be evidence.
Okay, that's
why, after all this time, I don't think there is evidence.
Pretty good, Glitch.
There's nothing to indicate that.
God
the hardest
damn.
part is to get
Can you
beyond the
hear it?
Ramseys with the law enforcement agencies and to pursue the killer. That's the hard part. Yes, I would like to find the intruder. And yes, I believe an intruder is involved in this crime.
I know you have said you're not doing this to exonerate John and Patsy Ramsey, but you're doing it for one person.
That's right.
Trump
That's
did
for
it.
JonBenet. And for the case, you have a responsibility to stand in her shoes.
The Ramseys are living in Atlanta and have filed libel suits against former and current Boulder police officers for their involvement in a book that implicates the Ramseys in the death of their own daughter. A number of law enforcement officials and Colorado Governor Bill Owens have criticized Lou Smith for going public, saying it's wrong to compromise an ongoing murder investigation. Smith says he hopes speaking out will prompt a new team of investigators to look at the case with fresh eyes. Meanwhile, the Boulder police...
As long as those eyes don't belong to Karen Arndt. Okay. Here is a video of a suspect, Darrell Kirkwood, aka David Cooper. We're going to listen to this one, and then we're going to listen to eyewitnesses, which I think is like fascinating.
Unsolved Mysteries, exclusive series JonBenet's Web Truths. If you are viewing this video on the day of its release, then you know today is a very special day. As sadly, it was 27 years ago today.
Whoever did your artwork for this ran into the exact same problem I ran into trying to hurry up and make the thumbnail. Except mine was a blue background.
That this little angel's parents woke up the morning after Christmas, found their precious daughter missing, and this infamous 2.5-page ransom letter on their back stairwell. Yet just 7 hours later, the family would be horrified to find JonBenet's lifeless body hidden in a storage room in the basement. And if you have been with us over the last few days, you would know that we have been discussing our particular suspect that we believe to be responsible for this heinous crime. So tonight we will be giving you a bit more information about our suspect and what the authorities should be looking for. But let me first try to quickly get you caught up. You see, we have already stated that the sick puppy monster that we believe to be responsible is a man who had gone by the name David Cooper, and in October of 2000, he confessed involvement in the crime to the Ramseys' pastor, Reverend Roel Hoverstock, the Ramseys' private investigator, Ollie Gray, the Ramseys' attorney, Lynn Wood, the chief of police at the time, Mark Beckner, and even spoke to the victim's father, John Ramsey, on 3 separate occasions. He told him how he had entered the home that evening, and also how he had exited. He described 3 unique items in the home that had never been known publicly, and he told John Ramsey that he was a hitman, hired by a disgruntled X-Access Graphics employee who felt John had screwed them over.
So
he then asked John to pay.
What is the connection between the Hendersons and this guy? Because if somebody was an employee and they're embezzling, that doesn't necessarily mean they have like ties to real heavy criminals. How does one go about finding a hitman?
For he and his family's airfare so that he could come and turn himself in. However, Ramsey's attorneys advised him otherwise, and they never heard from David Cooper again. And even though he himself received a confession from this man, and Ramsey investigators were pressuring Chief Beckner to follow this lead, the Boulder PD dismissed his claims and chose not to further investigate. Fortunately, in comes a rather odd informant, whom we learned
No, I guess
from our
someone hired him to do the hit, but like, how does a regular person find a hitman?
favorite CandyRose.com webpage is really a man named Frank Kaufman, who in addition to being a costume maker, is also a freelance journalist with a special interest in the Ramsey case. That in 2001 went on the Rivers Web Sleuth forum and gave us quite a bit more information regarding our David Cooper suspect in a thread titled more about Hitman. Starting
Jeff Merrick knew John since 71.
with the fact that even though we know the Boulder Police Department refused to further investigate this lead, it ends up it was a reporter who called Kirkwood. Likely the same journalist, Craig Lewis, who authored the aforementioned
Found him on
Hitman
Facebook.
I Killed JonBenet
It's pretty
article,
wild.
and is likely the one who identified our David Cooper suspect as this Daryl
Holy
W.
fuck. He probably became a criminal because of that neck of his.
Kirkwood fella. However, there's
when your neck is wider than the rest of your face.
Quite a big problem with him actually being the David Cooper that committed this heinous crime, because this Daryl Kirkwood has 100% been confirmed to have been incarcerated at the Westville Correctional
having too big a
Facility
neck.
in Indiana at the time of the crime. Therefore, there is no way he could have been the David Cooper suspect that actually committed this crime. However, nor do I think this Daryl W. Kirkwood is the same Daryl Kirkwood that confessed to all of these people
Rocky Road.
in October of 2000.
Good call, Corny. Good call.
Particularly because of something Mr. Kaufman said about this Daryl W. Kirkwood guy. As he told everyone, when Kirkwood was called, he was surprised to have been located. He was evasive and made strange remarks. He wouldn't admit to being David Cooper, but he claimed to know him and to know about Hitman. Okay, let me read that one more time, as it states Daryl W. Kirkwood wouldn't admit to being David Cooper, but he claimed to know him and to know about Hitman. Now isn't that a most interesting statement for this man to have made? However, I may have a rather simple explanation for what he might have meant by that, and perhaps an even better explanation for how this David Cooper suspect was able to
I learned, don't employ your friends or girlfriends.
to so perfectly describe intimate details of the Ramseys' home.
I didn't learn until after I sold my business as a learning experience to that.
Because you see, I did something unthinkable that the Boulder Police Department was apparently not willing or capable of doing. And I actually further investigated this David Cooper Daryl Kirkwood lead. And I believe after over 25 years, I actually found the sick puppy monster responsible for committing this heinous
Sick puppy monster makes me laugh every time you say it.
crime. And this man's name, incredibly enough, is in fact Daryl Kirkwood. Just not 30-year-old Daryl W. Kirkwood. No, this is another Daryl Kirkwood from Indiana, who was 27 at the time of the crime. And no, I did not just pick the first Daryl Kirkwood I found and pin this on him. I actually found 4 or 5 Daryl Kirkwoods, and I equally investigated each of them. Something the Boulder authorities should have and should be doing right now. But this particular 27-year-old Daryl Kirkwood of Indiana fits the bill quite well for multiple different reasons. Starting with the fact that my suspect may have been seen on Christmas Day outside of the Ramsey home while the family was away that evening, as it was reported by the Ramseys' neighbor Joe Barnhill that he had seen a suspicious-looking young man approaching the house that bore a striking resemblance to JonBenet's older half-brother John Andrew Ramsey. And let me tell you, my Daryl Kirkwood suspect could easily have been mistaken with young John Andrew Ramsey at that time. However, that is not the only eyewitness description that my suspect matches, and this eyewitness is incredibly enough the victim's father himself, John Ramsey, as Mr. Ramsey once described to the late great detective Lou Smith during police interviews in 1998 about what he described as a striking couple from the East.
What kind of car did he have back then?
Their young daughter that Mr. Ramsey had seen on Christmas Eve at both his church's twilight service and at Passage's restaurant afterward, which Mr. Ramsey found odd. He said that he had never seen them before or after that night. The male was described as
even
tall
though
with dark
I have absolutely zero faith in the science of handwriting analysis, which by the way is why signature verification on our ballots is retarded, but whatever. What up, Stickers? How you doing, brother? What neck of the woods was he caught in?
While she was said to have been very attractive. Mr. Ramsey said that they sat down beside them and the young family moved to a different part of the restaurant. Yeah, nothing odd about that. But it just so happens that my particular sick puppy David Cooper Daryl Kirkwood suspect and his family at the time just so happened to match that description perfectly, as he would have been 27, around 6 feet tall with dark hair.
Who was he married to? And can you get in touch with her?
and his 24-year-old wife at the time would certainly have fallen under the category of very attractive. They also had a young daughter together at that time that could be the daughter that Mr. Ramsey spoke of. But perhaps the most suspicious thing about my Daryl Kirkwood suspect and his wife at the time that makes me believe that this is the actual David Cooper that confessed and committed this crime is that while my Daryl Kirkwood suspect had been married to his beautiful wife for only 14 months before this crime occurred, he would file for divorce against her less than 6 months after the crime. However, this first divorce attempt would eventually dissolve and they would remain together for a few more years. That is until the year 2000, just after this David Cooper, Daryl Kirkwood guy makes all these rather convincing confessions to multiple key players in the case. And lo and behold, less than 1 month later, my Daryl Kirkwood suspect finally successfully files for divorce from his lovely wife for around 5 years and the mother of his 2 children. But I think that's about enough about my suspect for now. We will be discussing him quite a bit more from here on out, and I should have more info on all that around the new year.
Go sub to that channel.
For more.
Go. I'll put it again. Since there's like actively currently a schedule for stuff coming out, go sub. Okay. This should probably be the last one today. This is JonBenet's Web Truths, which I think Web Truths is like that's either another creator or a website. But this one I was particularly interested in about the eyewitness accounts.
To Unsolved Mysteries, JonBenet's Web Truths. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates.
Do that.
On our last episode, we discussed the plethora of tangible clues left around the crime scene. On tonight's episode, I was planning on speaking about eyewitness accounts relating to this crime when I remembered something District Attorney Alex Hunter once said. He said,
"This is a difficult case. This is a circumstantial evidence case. Those cases take longer. They require more patience. And I hope that for your viewers and for your readers, you will talk about the difference between some kind of eyewitness case and the kind of case that we have."
It took me too long, though, to like say something back.
Dealing with the death of this sweet, innocent, beautiful child.
So apparently Mr. Hunter believes this is a circumstantial evidence case, not an eyewitness case, and suggests that we talk about the difference, and so we shall. But let's see what former Detective Steve Thomas had to say.
That cracks me up every time, too.
Larry came live in 2000. He said,
"Everybody at this table wishes it was a smoking gun, no doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt case. It's not. It's a circumstantial case."
Yeah. Well, all cases where there's no witness.
Well, not necessarily if there's ballistics or DNA evidence or a bloody fingerprint.
wow, that's a deer in the headlights look if I ever saw one. It's almost as if he just remembered there is DNA evidence, but he also believes this is a circumstantial evidence case and not an eyewitness case. So let's see why. Because in the Ramsey's book, The Death of Innocence, they write, "We discovered other deficiencies that surfaced in the official investigation of our neighborhood around 755 15th Street."
But again, as I said earlier, I believe his Christmas bonus was paid in January of 2016. That he wasn't just given a bonus and that number's like fresh in his head. I believe it was given to him like 11 months earlier.
Neighbors living close to our former house had not been interviewed after the murder. In effect, some of the people in the closest concentric circle to where the murder occurred were simply written off as possible sources of information. We understood that one of the Boulder detectives had justified this omission by telling Officer Steve Ainsworth, who was on special assignment to the DA's office, "We don't need to do that. We know what happened. The Ramseys did it." Well, that might explain.
Yeah, it was a 1995 bonus that wasn't paid until January of 96. And so if you're paid on your page stubs every however often, when it shows the breakdown of your annual, it's always going to have bonus as a side thing. Especially if like you have a bonus and a Christmas bonus, then like it's going to be spelled out that way. And so like it's on the pay stub all year long. But if you got it 11 months earlier, then to me, that would be not, he can't remember that he kicked in a window.
Why DA Alex Hunter and Detective Steve Thomas are apparently not aware of any eyewitness testimonies. But a few pages later, the Ramseys elaborate. They say, on December 6, 1997, an article in the New York Times brought an issue to light on the national scale that should have started to unravel the police mask of competence. A University of Colorado history professor, Patricia Limerick, who lived directly across the street from our house at 755 15th Street, was interviewed. In this particular story, Patricia said, my husband and I have never interviewed by the police. For weeks I assumed it was a measure of how well the police were doing. Now I am not so sure. 11 months have passed since the murder in the neighborhood around our former house had never been completely canvassed. Where were the police? Patricia Limerick was asking the right questions. Well, right about now I'm questioning DA Hunter and Detective Thomas's declarations that this is a circumstantial and not eyewitness case. Because on tonight's episode of JonBenet's Web Truth, we will present a plethora of eyewitness account testimonies, starting with one that comes from the interrogation of John Ramsey by the late great Detective Lou Smith, in which Lou asks, do you know anyone that owns a black Jaguar? John asks, late model like XJS or a later model? Lou says, right. John says, no, they had a white one, the whites. It was kind of an unusual color, gold, it wasn't green, you know, but I don't remember. Lou asks, did they have a Jaguar convertible? John says, they do, yeah. Lou says, do you know anyone that owns a... John interrupts, hold on, yes I do. There is a guy that had an apartment or apartments in Barbara Fernie's mother's complex that we looked at renting. This was after this happened, for a place to live. And he had a black Jaguar, I believe. Lou informs us.
I wonder if that complex stickers is that rental that I went to. I mean, it's not the best looking place now, but it might have been new back then.
There was one scene in the neighborhood of the whites on that morning or that evening, so, and John replies, that's the only black Jaguar I've seen in Boulder. This guy's got to be a short guy. He was in real estate. He was in, but just peculiar, wasn't? I mean, no, but the Fernies might, because I think they put, I can't think of the name of the apartment complex, but it's where Barbara's mother had an apartment in Boulder. He had to leave. I think he had left it there where he had a sublease, perhaps. Which is further documented in a January 2002 deposition of Detective Lou Smith, in which he says on the 25th there was a Christmas party at the Whites just before the murder, just before the Ramseys came home, and there was a suspicious Jaguar vehicle reported in police reports driving back and forth.
I can promise you if I was going to go stake out a house, I wouldn't do it in the Mozzie.
By the White's residents on numerous occasions. I assume he is speaking of BPD report number 26-125, which states on Christmas Day 1996, someone inside a Ramsey family's friend's home noticed that a Jaguar convertible drove by that home at least 5 times. The Ramseys joined close friends for dinner inside that home on Christmas Day night. Now we have a bolo, or be on the lookout for a black Jaguar convertible, XJS or...
Now, maybe you're conveying something to somebody else. But again, I got my first cell phone on campus in 97, I think it was. Like a flip phone.
Later model, as I believe it was likely involved in the crime and used as a lookout vehicle, because there was one scene near the Whites that evening, which is pretty significant.
Damn, the old V12s. Jesus.
Significant is where they live in this dead-end neighborhood. There should not be too many vehicles driving by there too often, as just about every other intersection on this map would be more justifiably traveled intersection, as they are more part of the grid. Continuing on with Detective Lou Smith's interrogation of John Ramsey, Lou tells us about a van that was seen in the neighborhood that evening. He says, how about anybody that owns an Astro type van? Do you have any friends that own that, or people from Access that? There was an Astro type van seen in the area in the report. John asks what color. Lou says there was no color. John says the Access had a van that was a white Chrysler minivan. Astro van? No, I don't. Lou says, is it possible to tell? John says, except it might be a gray Caravan 5th Avenue, the one going down the street in 102, which could have been Fleet's. He had a gray Caravan. Then Lou moves on. So we are now also on the lookout for an Astro-type van of unidentified color, according to this June of 19...
So, I believe they make a longer version of this with a sliding door that is a 3-row bench seat, which would be a standard church van.
98 transcript. However, looking further into this mystery mobile, we learn more from an interesting source. Because around 1 year ago on the JonBenet Reddit page, 2 amateur detectives, one named M. May 333 and Samar Candy, are discussing the sightings of a mysterious Astro-type van, and Samar Candy provides an excerpt of a deposition of Detective Lou Smith, where he says, "On the 24th, just the day before the murder, there was a very suspicious party parked in a blue van directly across the street from the Ramsey's residence. This was in a police report and included in the police file. It was reported by a neighbor. M. May 333 posts BPD report number 1-98, which states, on December 24th, 1996, in the morning hours, a neighbor who was also a personal friend of Boulder Detective Linda Arndt observed a dark blue Astro van parked across the street from the Ramsey home. On December 25th..."
There's a level of planning, of ingenuity, creativity that says about an actual criminal, about moving their assets in anticipation of a problem.
5th at 10 a.m., the same neighbor observed a dark blue Astro van traveling northbound on 15th Street in the 700 block and stopped in front of the Ramsey home. On December 26, 1996, the same neighbor may have seen a dark blue Astro van parked in the same general location near front of Ramsey home. To which Samar Candy says, "Ooh, thanks, May. I didn't have these details. I've never gotten around to collecting all this stuff from Woodward's book, which I suppose these were in. You obviously..."
What was Hoverstock driving when he got to the house?
"Have, so thanks for doing the work. This is what I had in my notes about the van. Gene Fortier reported a dark blue Astro van parked across from 755 15th Street on both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. As far as is known, no one knows whose vehicle it was or who they may have been visiting or watching. So now we know it is reported to have been a dark blue Astro van, and it was eyewitnessed by a woman named Gene Fortier, who is a neighbor from up the road, whose children had met the Ramsey children for the first time and were at the Ramsey's house playing on that infamous Christmas Day. But to get a better idea of her vantage point, we turn to this map.
This is the best graphic of all the videos of yours I've seen.
Map of 15th Street where the Ramsey home was located. And going 2 houses to the south, we find the Fortier house. But while we are on this map, directly across the street is the Limerick house, where the aforementioned Patricia lived, who had never been questioned by the Boulder Police Department. And we will come back to this map more as we move along. But bringing it back to the clues, I introduce you to what is known as the Bonita Papers, which were written by a woman named Benita Sawyer, who is the secretary.
Oh, not Benita Applebaum?
Slash paralegal for a Denver attorney named Dan Hoffman. But once again, I will turn to internet poster Samara Candy to explain it, as she did a wonderful job explaining on the JonBenet Ramsey murder discussion community page. She stated, "The Bonita Papers are purported to be notes on the case, written up by paralegal Benita Sawyer in 1999. Sawyer worked in the offices of Dan Hoffman, a Denver lawyer who was for a time working pro bono for the Boulder police in the lead up to the grand jury investigation as a member of the police dream team who were advising the police on how to present their case. Many police files would have come into Hoffman's office from August 1997 when he was first appointed. Internet poster Spade, which she details further below, said, Benita wrote her material up in 1999. It would seem likely that this would have been after the grand jury disbanded in October 1999. When the notes appeared on the Forums for Justice forums in 2004, the story that circulated along with them was that Sawyer thought she might one day write a book about the case, and so she kept her own notes from all the documents she had been given access to during her time in the Hoffman offices. The story also goes that the notes she had written up came to be stolen by a nephew of hers, and from him, somehow a poster by the name of Spade got hold of them. It was through Spade that they ended up on Forums for Justice. Because of their source and the anonymity of the poster Spade, many people do not trust the Bonita Papers as being what they were purported to be by him.
There's better OPSEC than the fucking douchebag that put the top secret docs on Discord. Teixeira or whatever his name was.
That is a choice each person has to make for his or herself.
Imagine having top secret clearance and there's better OPSEC around the fucking Ramsey case.
As for myself, I find them to have a ring of authenticity about them, as they appear to have been written by a well-educated person who likely had legal training. I have read many of Spade's posts and believe him to be honest in what he writes. It is also my understanding that he was at the time a local resident, and therefore could have been an acquaintance of Sawyer's nephew, the one who got a hold of the notes. So I am prepared to believe the notes were an accurate presentation of evidence the police said they had gathered from December 1996 through to September 1998, and that they appeared on the internet in the way Spade described. Which for the most part, I tend to agree with also, at least in the validity of the opening statement, in which she speaks of neighbor Melody Stanton, who heard a child scream that evening. Benita says, Melody Stanton awoke abruptly from a deep sleep. The prior stillness of the Boulder night had been pierced by the harrowing scream of a child. She assumed it was somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m., but didn't look at the alarm clock. The scream lasted 3 to 5 seconds and stopped as abruptly as it started. Melody momentarily wondered what to do, but thought that surely the parents would hear and
Is there a way for a scream to stop unabruptly? Like, it's like, ah!
come to the child's rescue. Although still bothered by the scream and the thought that a child had been injured, Melody eventually went back to sleep. Melody Stanton was interviewed by Detective Barry Hartkop on January 3rd. Stanton lives across the street in one house to the south of the Ramseys. Her bedroom is on the second floor of the west side of the house, which faces the Ramsey home. On Christmas night, she had gone to bed at approximately 10 p.m. Stanton always slept with her window slightly open, and on that night she had it opened 6 to 8 inches. She related that she had fallen asleep shortly after she went to bed, but was awakened by one loud, incredible scream. She related it was obviously from a child and that it lasted 3 to 5 seconds and then abruptly stopped. It appeared that the sound came from across the street.
At their house. I don't think so. Typically those would be done on a Wednesday, I think. But I don't know.
South of the Ramsey residence. She did not look at the clock, but estimated the time at somewhere between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. She stayed awake and listened for any other noise for 5 to 10 minutes, but heard absolutely nothing. After that, no cars, no voices, no footsteps, so she eventually went back to sleep. Stanton said she had not left on any televisions or radios when she went to bed. She admitted she did not sit up in bed to look out the window, so she did not see any activity outside her window. When asked why she had not come forward with this information right after the homicide when detectives had canvassed the neighborhood, Stanton said she was shocked by JonBenet's death, that she at first did not make any connection to the scream. Also, since none of the other neighbors had not mentioned to her about hearing a scream, she began to doubt she actually heard it. In fact, when she told her husband, he said she had probably imagined it. It was Diane Brumfitt, a friend of Stanton's, who reported this incident to the Boulder police after her conversation with Stanton. So neighbor Melody Stanton appears to have heard a scream.
I think the pen and pad were taken prior. I think the note was brought with them or him or whoever and was left on the way out. That's just my thoughts, though.
Scream just after midnight on Boxing Day, which is not surprising as on the front of the home facing the road is a window and pipe in the boiler room, which explains how she was able to so easily hear JonBenet scream. And I had every intention of using a clip of private investigator John St. Augustine on the Dr. Oz show, explaining to Dr. Oz how this could
This is a funny little jab at the Dr. Oz show.
But unfortunately, the fine folks on YouTube or the Dr. Oz show do not fully understand the concept of commentary under the Fair Use Act and gave me my first copyright strike. So, we will go about this a totally different way, and I will transform it into my own masterpiece by speaking over the video while trying to explain.
Some people, just FYI, some people have a service that'll do that automatically, that they pay for that. Just like people used to offer services for us to collect our accounts receivable.
That the belief is that JonBenet was somewhere in this boiler room / hallway area.
Dude, that's a hell of a diorama.
And the sound of her scream was radiator amplified through this pipe on the east side of the home, which sent the sound directly towards Melody Stanton's home and slightly opened window. which makes perfectly good sense to me, as we see from our aerial map of 15th Street and the Ramsey home, that directly across the street, just south of the Limerick house, is the Stanton home. However, in Detective Steve Thomas's book, he tells the Melody Stanton story a bit differently. He states, "But we all agreed that Melody Stanton, the neighbor who claimed to have heard a scream, obviously that of a child on Christmas night, could have done so. I wanted to go over and talk to her then and dig deeper into her story, but Deputy D.A. DeMuth refused putting a blockade between police and Melody Stanton. He said he planned to prep her before a trial. DeMuth didn't explain his reasons to mere police officers and detectives. I could not fathom why a prosecutor would intentionally stop us from talking to her. Such a thing had never happened before in any investigation I was involved in, but with a wave of his hand, poof, DeMuth sealed off an important avenue investigation from the investigators. I knew that in other cities, not only would the prosecutor have okayed the interview, but he probably would have helped conduct it on the spot. The difference of opinion between the DA's office and the police had thrown into question whether or not there was a scream at all. It would be up to..."
Well, there's no doubt that the interplay between the police and the DA was a huge contributor in never getting anywhere.
A jury to make the ultimate decision. So at this point, his book, he is saying the Deputy District Attorney Trip DeMuth was blocking police from interviewing Melody Stanton. However, elsewhere in his book, he states, "In a few days, another neighbor, Melody Stanton, who lived at 738 15th Street, diagonally across..."
There was a climate already before this where the DA wouldn't let them... The police and the district attorney were at odds already, because the police felt, why would we do our job if you won't lock anybody up? So there's like this contentious relationship already.
From the Ramsey home also changed her original story, which was that she had not noticed anything unusual on the night JonBenet died. When a detective interviewed her a second time, Stanton admitted that she had not told the truth.
At one point, I heard there was a crease in the note. I never see it, and I never think to look for it, but at one point it was said it was creased. If that's the case, it would make sense they had it folded up in the notepad when they brought it back
earlier, because she did not want to be involved in the case.
But I don't know if that's real.
She now claimed to have heard the piercing scream of a child between midnight and 2 o'clock on the morning of December 26. If that cry came from JonBenet, it would help determine the time of death. If a neighbor clear across the street heard the scream, I wondered how anyone in the house could not have heard it. Her story, which seemed to be a clear piece of evidence, contained its own seed of destruction. However, more than a year later, we would discover that Stanton also told the detective it may not have been an audible scream, but rather the negative energy radiating from JonBenet. The detective returned to that odd point several times during the interview, but Stanton never again mentioned the negative energy. She insisted that she heard an audible scream, so the detective did not include the negative energy comment in his report. A year later, he was ordered to write an amended report. Changing a report is a huge issue for police, since it brings the...
Who ordered him to write the report?
...validity of the entire statement into question. His revised report was not the first, and it would not be the last that would enter the Ramsey case file. So Mr. Thomas puts the validity of...
It's so hard for me to think this was incompetence.
Melody's statement.
I mean, how can you mess this up to such a phenomenal degree? If I was the DA, I guess I could look at the behavior of the cops on that day and be like, I don't trust any one of you fuckers.
In question once again. However, in 2016, investigative journalist Paula Woodward publishes her book titled We Have Your Daughter, in which she reveals new evidence, which brings the validity of Melody's statement back into question. She states, another Ramsey neighbor stated that she had heard one loud, incredible scream. It was the loudest, most terrifying scream she had ever heard. It was obviously from a child and lasted 3 to 5 seconds, at which time it stopped abruptly.
Wait a second. Are there two different witnesses that said exactly 3 to 5 seconds? Or is this the same witness? There's something wrong with that. If two witnesses both said exactly it lasted about 3 to 5 seconds, something's wrong with that. The DA was Alex Hunter.
She thought the parents would hear the scream. The scream came from across the street south of the Ramsey residence. It happened between midnight and 2 a.m. the morning of December 26, 1996, from BPD reports number 1, 1930, number 1, 174, and number 1, 175. From BPD reports 1, 174.
I'm not okay with two different people saying 3 to 5 seconds. Unless they were asked like a multiple choice question. Even if you said how long was the scream, the likelihood of them both saying 3 to 5 seconds. So implausible.
1481, 1548. Another neighbor who lives south of the Ramsey house contacted a BPD detective on December 31st because of the scream the first neighbor had heard. The neighbor said she also heard a scream. She was interviewed on February 26, 1997.
Maybe this was just re-quoting the one from before and this other one.
Confirmed eyewitnesses who heard her scream that evening. But that is not the only significant clue that we will get from the Barn Hills. Because according to Perfect Murder, Perfect Town author Lawrence Schiller, there is a bit more to the story, and it involves this man, Jeff Shapiro, who was a reporter for the Globe. But Lawrence Schiller writes,
so Shapiro went undercover. He lied to the cops. He lied to, like, are you a journalist? Nah, Ski, I'm not. Okay, wait, maybe I lied. Okay, cool. I want to see more of you. What? Like, there's so much about this guy's story that is weird.
It wasn't long afterward that Shapiro found Melody Stanton, the Ramsey's neighbor who had heard the scream the night JonBenet was killed. Unaware of how important her memory of that night was to police, she told Shapiro what she told the police on December 26. Also buried in
this dude was like a one-man spotlight.
This Globe story was the fact that Stanton's husband had heard a crashing sound, the sound of metal on concrete, sometime after the scream. This suggested that someone, possibly an intruder, had left the house. The story, which made headlines, was a scoop for Shapiro. So not only was Melody Stanton abruptly awakened by a child's scream, but after waking up her husband and then going back to sleep, he would hear a crashing sound, which he described as the sound of metal on concrete.
Maybe. He did. Well, with the name like Shapiro, the first thing I was like, member of the tribe. I knew a bunch of Shapiros growing up.
While we were on the conversation of neighbors who witnessed unusual activity around the house that evening, we come to BPD report number 1-99, which states, another neighbor who lived just north of the Ramsey house told police investigators that at midnight between December 25th and 26th, he looked out his kitchen window at the Ramsey residence and observed the upper kitchen lights were on and dimmed low. He added that this was the first time that he had seen these particular lights illuminated in the 5 years that he'd lived next door to the Ramseys. He said these lights were located in the ceiling above the kitchen window. Moving over to the book Perfect
Recess lights?
Murder, Perfect Town, Lawrence Schiller states, at about midnight, Scott Gibbons, a neighbor, looked out his kitchen window toward the Ramsey house and saw a light on in the kitchen area. So now we have a name to go with the original BPD report we just mentioned. But a few pages later, Schiller also informs us that Scott Gibbons, the Ramsey's next-door neighbor, told police that at about 8 a.m. he saw the door on his side of the Ramsey's house open. Schiller also adds, but by then, anyone inside the house could have opened the door, which...
Well, that would jive with the cops being there, opening the door. If we're talking about 8 a.m. on the 26th.
May have been true. However, I do not believe anyone approved to be in the house that morning would likely have left the door just hanging open on a cold December morning in the mountains of Colorado. But to get a better understanding of the proximity of Mr. Gibbons' house to the Ramsey house, we go back to our aerial map of 15th Street.
Okay, here. Here's the back alley. Here's the garage. And this utility box goes to the house they're talking about, I believe. No, that's the garage. My bad. No, that's the neighbor's garage. That utility box is a neighbor's garage. It was 6 a.m. That was Fernie. So that's the back alley. So when you look at this, that must be their garage.
Shows that the houses are relatively close to one another. And in case you're questioning how Mr. Gibbons would have been able to see that from his house, courtesy of prominent internet poster Jameson245, this is a picture that was taken with their back against the wall from right below the window he would have been looking out, which not only shows a relatively clear line of sight to the open door, but also the kitchen window above in which he saw the strange lights on, which he had never seen before in the 5 years he had lived next to the.
Okay, so the kitchen is actually on the, if you go through the door and you go straight past the spiral stairs, you're in like a little area where they found the pad. And then I think as soon as you cross the little border divider, which doesn't really divide the room, but there's like a little L, I think there on the other side is the kitchen. So I'm not sure what window he's seeing that through from that side.
Ramsey's. And in case you didn't notice how recessed back that window is from the butler door, I present a video from the Paula Woodward YouTube channel where the cameraman is identifying it as the kitchen window.
Window is located directly over the butler's kitchen and the north door,
which demonstrates that from that angle it would be difficult to see anything.
The butler pantry.
Lighting and the ceiling. However, the Ramseys themselves.
So maybe it's not the kitchen, quote unquote.
Provide us with additional information in one of their books when they state, I was shocked to see that they had found the butler kitchen door, which led to the outside, open. This was reported by one of our friends when he arrived shortly after 6 in the morning. I'd never even noticed that open door as we were frantically rushed around making phone calls, and yet there on the police diagram on our home was the note, door found open. So supposedly one of their friends who arrived that morning also reported finding the side butler pantry door open.
I didn't understand how someone could have gotten in. Of course, I learned later that one of the doors was found wide open.
How do we know for sure? We turned to the deposition of Detective Lou Smith from the 2002 Wolf Ramsey case, in which he states, it was noted in a police report that John Fernie, one of the friends of John Ramsey and one of the friends that was called over, he arrived at the scene shortly after 6 a.m. The call was made perhaps 10 minutes later. John Fernie immediately got in his car, went to the Ramsey home, and arrived there shortly after 6 a.m. When he arrived there, he told his wife that the door to the butler door was open. This is a photograph, an early photograph that was taken of that butler door. The person who took this photograph took it for a reason. The door is open. To which he is asked, and that was taken by a Boulder Police Department crime scene technician? Lou says yes. And I believe this is that picture. So it appears the door in the northwest corner of the Ramsey home, often referred to as the butler door, had in fact been left open that morning. And while we have the door open, I believe this is a good opportunity to try to explain how exactly the butler pantry ties into the rest of the house. Because the floor plan drawings can be kind of confusing, as this house is in a way...
So, okay. We'll go over this. This right here. This line, and then this wall, right? This was the original property. The original property only included this part of the house. This here, likely, well, it doesn't have a basement. So this is, underneath here is a basement. Underneath here, there is not a basement. These stairs do not lead to the basement. They only go up and down. This is where you have to go down to the basement. So again, what I would have done is come in this door, up these stairs, directly to JonBenet's 420, directly to JonBenet's room, back down these stairs, and this is where the pad was, this right here. This is where the pen was, I think, right here. I think this is where the flashlight was. So I'm still struggling to understand how somebody on this wall saw the lights in the kitchen. Because there's a wall right here. I don't know. This is not really important. So I'm not sure what exactly this door would do.
Actually a 5-story or multi-split level home. But we will start with the stairs going to the west, which go directly to the bottom of the infamous spiral staircase on which the ransom note was found, and leads directly up to just outside of JonBenet's bedroom. Coming back down the spiral staircase.
Let me look at that again real quick. So this leads back up to the second floor. A lot of times in older homes, this was like a way for the servants to not be part of the main house. You'll often find a back staircase to a kitchen and a main staircase to the kitchen in older, rich areas.
A 5-story or multi-split level home. But we will start with the stairs going to the west, which go directly to the bottom of the infamous spiral staircase.
Well, it's also why when you look at where they exited out of the basement, it's in the middle of the backyard.
Which the ransom note was found, and leads directly up to just outside of JonBenet's bedroom. Coming back down the spiral staircase to that set of stairs, we observe that there are a total of 8 stairs there before you get to the butler pantry level. To see how you get from that level to the basement stairs, we will focus in on the few stairs going to the east, which is more easily understood by utilizing another of Paula Woodward's YouTube channel videos. Where it shows the butler pantry door pans to the right and shows 2 stairs going straight up. 1 stair to the right, followed by 1 more stair straight up.
I have a feeling that's probably where the upstairs laundry is.
And a stair to the left, which leads to the basement door, which is just to the right. So from the spiral staircase, that makes 8 steps down, across the butler pantry floor, and 5 steps up, before descending down the basement stairs. But there is one other path that could have been taken, which would have been to go down the hall, cut left through the kitchen, and then cut left again, go down 3 steps, and take a right to go down the basement stairs.
I didn't understand the logistics of the pantry, so I'm glad I was listening to this and not watching it.
We have a better understanding of the layout of the house and how the various paths that the intruder could have taken to bring JonBenet into the basement. We will go back outside too. Our next clue regarding neighbors observing odd things that evening comes from BPD report number 1.
This is a solid video, by the way. I've watched a shit ton of content, and there's some people that are unwatchable because it's all like opinion enforced, but this is very well done.
1196, which states, furthermore, a neighbor who lives immediately south of the Ramsey residence got up to use the restroom and saw that the light in the southeast corner of the
neighbor who lived immediately south of the Ramsey's residence got up to use the restroom and saw the light in the southeast corner of the house, which had been left on every night for the past 5 years, was out.
The house, which had been left on every night for the past 5 years, was out. And once again, we looked to Lawrence Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, put a name to the BPD report, because Schiller states, Diane Brumfitt, another neighbor, told Detective Barry Hartkopp on December 31st that on Christmas night, she did not see a light on at the southeast corner of the Ramsey house. Though there had been a safety light in that spot for years, she remembered thinking that it was unusual.
Was the pantry part of the add-on? let's see, 24, 29.
Corner of the Ramsey home, often referred to as the butler door, had in fact been left open that morning. And while we have the door open, I believe this is a good opportunity to try to explain how exactly the butler pantry ties.
Okay. No, this is an original wall right here. So the kitchen, the original kitchen is here. That's why I'm saying this is where any prep work or whatever for a caterer or for a servant, all of this could be done without, you know, having to have the peasants be part of your residence.
Into the rest of the house, because the floor plan drawings can be kind of confusing, as this house is in a way actually a 5-story or multi-split level home. But we will start with the stairs.
You say are you here too?
Going to the west, which go directly to the bottom of the infamous spiral staircase on which the ransom note was found, and leads directly up to just outside of JonBenet's bedroom. Coming back down the spiral staircase to that set of stairs, we observe that there are a total of 8 stairs there before you get to the butler pantry level. To see how you get from that level to the basement stairs, we will focus in on the few stairs going to the east.
Well, what does this side lead to?
Which is more easily...
It leads back up to the kitchen. Oh, not the second floor. Duh, not a laundry. My bad.
Understood by utilizing another of Paula Woodward's YouTube channel videos, where it shows the butler pantry door pans to the right and shows 2 stairs going straight up. 1 stair to the right, followed by 1 more stair straight up, and a stair to the left, which leads to the basement door, which is just to the...
There's more than just a cupboard there, right?
Right. So from the spiral staircase, that makes 8 steps down, across the butler pantry floor,
I love it here.
and 5 steps up, before descending down the basement stairs. But there is one other path that could have been taken, which would have been to go down the hall, cut left through the kitchen, and then cut left again, go down 3 steps, and take a right to go down the basement stairs. Now that we have a better understanding of the layout of the house and how the various paths that the intruder could have taken to bring JonBenet into the basement, we will go back outside to our next clue regarding neighbors observing odd things.
There was laundry upstairs too. And by upstairs, I don't know if that means the floor John and Patsy were on or the second floor.
From BPD report number 1-1196, which states, furthermore, a neighbor who lives immediately south of the Ramsey residence got up to use the restroom and saw that the light in the southeast corner of the house, which had been left on every night for the past 5 years, was out. And once again, we looked to Lawrence Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, put a name to the BPD report, because Schiller states, Diane Brumfitt, another neighbor, told Detective Barry Hartkopp on December 31st that on Christmas night, she did not see a light on at the southeast corner of the Ramsey house. Though there had been a safety light in that spot for years, she remembered thinking that it was unusual. Now, to determine the proximity of Diane Brumfitt's house to the Ramsey's house, we go back to our aerial map of 15th Street.
Which light is she talking about? Are we talking about a floodlight? The same one that I said would be the reason I wouldn't come in that way?
For years, she remembered thinking that it was unusual. Now, to determine the proximity of Diane Brumfitt's house to the Ramsey's house, we go back to our aerial map of 15th Street, where we see that their houses were not that far apart. And in case you're in doubt of neighbor Diane Brumfitt's line of sight, once again, courtesy of prominent internet poster and amateur...
So she means inside the house.
Detective Jameson 245. This is a picture taken with back against the wall from right below her kitchen window, and this is back against the wall from right below her TV room. But back to the conversation of safety lights, we go back to the interrogation of John Ramsey by Detective Lou Smith. He asked,
safety light sounds like an outdoor floodlight. I mean, everybody of my generation and earlier, we either left a light on at all times, or you had a light on a timer that would turn on to make it appear that somebody was home. Like that was our like theft repellent, was a light timer or like a light being left on. I still have the habit.
Where was the street light located at? John says, I don't remember. I think there's a telephone pole right in here somewhere. Lou says in front of the... John says, I mean, there was one down here maybe. Yeah, they are in the front of the house. No, that's not right. The telephone pole is in the back of the house. We had a lawn light that was out at the edge of the drive, edge of the sidewalk. Lou asks, was that normally on or off? John says, I think it was normally on. It usually was left on all the time. Lou continues by asking, how about on the first floor? John says, I think we might have left lights on in the study. We might have left the light on, you know, in front of the window here sometimes. Lou asks, solarium? John says, in the solarium. Lou says, we talked to Miss Bloomfield, Brumfitt, next door. She said normally the light was on in the solarium, but that night it was off. Does that sound logical? John says, well, it's possible. I mean, we came home after dark. We were tired. I wouldn't... Burke and I played in the living room for a little bit, but I can't say for certain that I turned it on. Sometimes this light, there is an outdoor light right there. Sometimes that. Lou interjects with the question, door light? You're pointing to the door light of the solarium that opens to the south? John says, right. Sometimes we would leave this light on here, outside of the dining room doors, because it illuminated the patio. Lou asks, to the west? John says, right, but not always. You know, so we at least had some lights on normally. We never turn them all off. I guess I shouldn't say never, but never intentionally turn them all off. I wasn't comfortable. So while on the north side of the home, the butler's kitchen door was left ajar, on the south side of the home, where the infamous window well is located, there's apparently a burnout or turned off light. Speaking of dim lit lights, we find ourselves back with Detective Steve Thomas and his book Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation for our next eyewitness neighbor account, in which he states, another reason to interview the Barnhills.
I could easily see, look, my dad, I bet you John Ramsey was a lot like my dad. My dad worked 6 days a week, and even when he wasn't working, sometimes he would be working. I think it's very plausible not knowing which lights are typically on and off at all times.
Was that Joe had told the police he had seen JonBenet's older half-brother John Andrew in Boulder on the evening of December 25th. Thomas says John Andrew claimed to have been in Atlanta at the time. Come on, Steve, you know damn well he was in Atlanta that night. But Thomas continues, during the interview, Barnhill sheepishly told us he had made a mistake and apologized, saying that he would probably not even recognize the young man in a crowd. Thomas concludes that went a long way toward firming up John Andrews' alibi. So even though it appears Detective Steve Thomas is still questioning John Andrews' alibi, what I gathered from Joe Barnhill's statement is that he actually saw someone who resembled John Andrew Ramsey, which would explain why when District Attorney Alex Hunter answered the way that he had when questioned about John Andrew. That exchange went as follows.
Mr. Hunter, can you tell me if John Andrew Ramsey's alibi is now being questioned?
We have more work to do on John Andrews' alibi.
Well, that answer did not satisfy many people.
There's something wrong with how he answered that question.
Work to do on John Andrews.
She asked an affirmative.
Andrew, that exchange went as follows.
Mr. Hunter, can you tell me if John Andrew Ramsey's alibi is now being questioned?
I mean, he nods his head yes. So, yes.
We have more work to do on John Andrews' alibi.
It's really
well,
funny.
That answer did not satisfy many people, including the reporters who just a short while later asked the follow-up question.
Alex, if you could respond to the John Ramsey Jr. alibi question. Earlier, very early on, the police indicated that he was out of state, and common sense sort of indicates if a person's out of state, it's fairly difficult to commit a crime. Does that mean you no longer believe that?
I'm just saying that there's more work that we're doing on that.
Clarify that.
No, I don't want to go beyond that.
And although D.A. Hunter does not want to clarify or go beyond that, I say. So now we are on the lookout for a John Andrew doppelganger, or at least someone who resembled him from a distance, but not necessarily a far distance. As we go back to our 15th Street aerial map in the Ramsey home, we see that the Barnhill house is just kitty corner across the street, just north of Patricia Limerick's. But looking further into the story of Joe Barnhill, we look to the internet, more specifically the website at candyrose.com, where they have a message board called Voy Forums, and a thread titled Subject Joe Barnhill, in which a poster named Rita Johnson says in November of 2003 that Joe Barnhill and her have spoken on numerous occasions, and he very sadly said he has never been contacted by the family and doesn't know why. She adds, the only one that contacted him was one of their investigators telling him to be quiet and never talk about what he saw the morning of the murder.
What?
He said, they told me I was mistaken. I found that to be very odd.
That's a lot to take in. I mean, it's not evidence, it's a statement on the internet, but...
Titled Subject Joe Barnhill, in which a poster named Rita Johnson says in November of 2003 that Joe Barnhill and her have spoken on numerous occasions, and he very sadly said he has never been contacted by the family and doesn't know why. She adds, the only one that contacted him was one of their investigators telling him to be quiet and never talk about what he saw the morning of the murder. He said, they told me I was mistaken. I found that to be very odd. Well, I find that to be...
And they left Arndt there by herself. And she's obviously uber incompetent.
Particularly odd also, as John Ramsey tells things a bit differently while being interrogated by former Assistant U.S. Attorney and Grand Jury Specialist Michael Cain, who was brought into the DA's office by Alex Hunter, who says, okay, you have heard, I am sure, that you had a neighbor, I believe, that lived in, is it Melody Stanton, 738? John says, kind of catty corner? Okay, yeah. Cain says, 738 across the street from you, who said that she heard a scream. John says, well, I heard that a scream was heard, I assumed it was down here, so this is, and I saw this when we looked at it, but I always thought it was from this house. I don't know why. But Cain continues his questioning. He asks, did you know Melanie Stanton? John says, we met the woman who lived there. We think had a son or a daughter. I think it was a son, but I don't know her. In fact, I wouldn't recognize her, I don't think. Cain asks, you haven't talked to her? John says no. Cain asks, at all? John says no. Cain asks, so you haven't followed up on that? John says, well, I don't know, and asks his attorney, Brian Morgan, have we? Morgan says, I think we tried to. Cain asks, do you have any further information on that? John says, no, I don't. I mean, I also heard somebody heard a grate being scraped across the pavement. Cain asks, who is that? John says, I don't know, I just heard that. Cain says, well, was that Ramsey's private investigator, David Williams, says, I think that came from the internet. I think it's supposed to be Melanie Stanton's husband. And I think that it was the banging of a grate, and I believe that its basis comes from a tabloid. Cain says, okay. Detective Lou Smith asks, but you haven't contacted the Stantons at all? Williams says, I think we tried. Smith says, so you were unsuccessful? Attorney Morgan says, I believe so. We will let you know she is one of the people that wants to talk with us, I think. Their PI, David Williams, concludes.
See, I don't trust this law firm. I mean, I don't trust this law firm.
But I think the information originally came from the Globe about the scream and the grate, the metal pounding against cement.
That Globe would be Shapiro.
Something like that. Furthermore, elsewhere on candyrose.com is a transcript of an April 2000 CNN special called Burden of Proof, where John and Patsy Ramsey discuss their book, The Death of Innocence. And while discussing what the Ramseys suggest an investigator should do, CNN commentator Greta Van Susteren asks, what would you tell them to do? Patsy says, I would say, this is the room where all of the evidence is stored.
I mean, I think it's more than possible there was more than one person in that house.
Start from the beginning, start combing and go. John says, go back to the neighborhood, talk to the neighbors. That's never been done by the police. Start from the beginning, start from scratch. Sit down with the parents, sit down with anybody that will talk to you within 100 yards radius of the house. Greta asks, didn't they talk to the neighbor, though, who heard a scream at some point? Patsy says, we don't know, Greta, because no one has ever... We hear rumors all the time. No one in authority has ever talked with us and told us what they know. John says, what we know is what we have read or heard on television. We have not.
Wait, the problem I have with these answers is they have their own investigative team. So, like, playing dumb and not knowing anything doesn't make sense to me either.
Heard anything official from the police. So was there a woman that heard a scream? I believe so because I've heard that reported. Greta asks, but you don't know for certain? John says, I don't know for certain. So since the Ramseys were not even certain that neighbor Melody Stanton had actually heard a child scream, it would not appear that any Ramsey investigator would have contacted neighbor Joe Barnhill, nor told him he was mistaken about what he saw and to be quiet. So just who was this supposed mystery investigator who contacted Barnhill? Perhaps we'll never know. But that leads me to yet another unexplained reported eyewitness account, which is also documented on the website of candyrose.com, and a supposed sighting of a man seen running from the crime scene in the early morning hours on December 26, 1996. Looking further into the story, it was initially reported on the Boulder.
It could have been, they're thinking, the insinuation is the sound was the metal grate above the window being dropped down.
News forum on January 26 of 1997 by a man using the handle JD, but he says, on KHOW radio in Denver about a week ago or so, a woman neighbor of Ramsey's called in and stated on the air that she had seen a running man, tall and slender, running away from the scene of the crime on December 26. She thought it was important, and so she reported her observation to the police. The police had not investigated her eyewitness story as of that time. The woman made her statement on the morning KHOW talk show hosted by Peter Boyle. If anyone has time and inclination, get tape of show, contact neighbor, ask police to follow up. Also, make sure that the Ramseys lawyers in Denver are aware of this claimed eyewitness story. And although I am not sure the Ramseys lawyers were aware of this, I know that Detective Lou Smith was, as he stated on the recent ABC 2020 special, The List.
There was a person seen going across the lawn of the Ramsey house. The night of the murder. Was her killer trying to get into the house?
Or was he trying to leave the house? Because looking back to the JonBenet Reddit page, we find a post by Samar Candy where she specifies, no, Barnhill saw his guy late afternoon on the 25th. Running man was seen leaving the scene of the crime sometime after midnight on the 26th. At least that's the information I have. Which is correct, because Running Man was reported to have been seen on December 26th, as is documented on the candyrose.com webpage regarding the Running Man sighting, which is clearly marked December 26th. But now to conclude this episode, I would like to go back 2 days to December 24th, Christmas Eve, to what I believe is the greatest, most important eyewitness account, which I have not seen many people speaking of, at least not for quite a while, and that comes from the interrogation of John Ramsey by the late great detective Lou Smith, and while discussing Christmas Eve of 1996,
yeah,
John
I've seen
says,
that.
Just to back
that
up.
That I've seen. The only thing about that is I'm unconvinced that the fucking dumb shit cops didn't do that. But I still think it's an interesting piece of evidence. I just, the level of incompetence makes everything so hard. Like the picture of the ransom letter. Oh, why have that picture? That's not even how it was found.
One step with Pasta J. The only thing I noticed that night, that when there was this very striking couple there with their daughter who just stood out in my mind. And I noticed her in church, and he had very dark hair, and she was very attractive. And I had never seen them in church, and they looked kind of like they were from East. They were well cared for, they were dressed up, and they were in Pasta J's.
Yeah, you're right.
Lou asks also, John says also, and they kind of sat near us in the same room, and then they moved to a table in the other room, and I thought, Lou asks, is this the first time you thought of that? John says, no, I thought about it before. What was that? Who was it? I mean, it was kind of I saw these people in church, and it's a coincidence that they ate in Pasta J's. And later I thought, who were those people? Lou asks, were they in a farther row, or did anyone know them? Would that be an assigned register? John says, no, it's just a piece of data. Lou says, and you never seen them since? John says no, and then Lou moves on. So we are looking for a striking family of 3, possibly from the East Coast. He will have dark hair, and she will have been, as John said, very attractive. They will have a daughter, whom I believe is likely much younger than JonBenet, as he did not mention any interactions with JonBenet and said daughter, either in the church or while they were sitting near them in Pasta J's. From my experience as a father of 3 myself, if there are any other kids of similar age within the vicinity of my kids, they tend to gravitate towards them. However, Detective Steve Thomas didn't put much stock in this eyewitness testimony, according to his book, JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, in which he states, then he offered up a smorgasbord of suspects suspects that included a cook at Pasta J's restaurant, a striking couple from back east who had been seen in church, his secretary's boyfriend, other church members, business associates, pigsty neighbors, and assorted fringe players. So, Detective Steve Thomas just bundled this highly questionable lead in with others as just part of the smorgasbord of assorted fringe player suspects. However, of all the eyewitness accounts we have discussed in this episode, I found this to be the most important, because I believe Mr. Ramsey is our greatest eyewitness to this horrible monster who...
I will say, critically, I hate your thumbnails. I absolutely hate them. The fonts that you use are fonts as a sign guy we would never use, and we loathe them. This is, if you were going to make this, it better be a high-end company, because it's an unreadable font from a distance. This is extremely annoying as a font. But there is a theory about it being split into quadrants, and these faces, that's why I just changed the thumbnail, because these faces are in like the perfect correct locations.
Most important, because I believe Mr. Ramsey is our greatest eyewitness to this horrible monster who committed this heinous crime. We will discuss that much more in future episodes. But for now, I will conclude this episode of JonBenet's Web Truths. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the...
Well, my car, there's no way I would have driven my car through that alley. Well, not no way. Not no way. But it might have scraped. But my car's like, my car's way lower than that Jag would have been. Yeah, absolutely. I don't pull a lot of punches, so I'm not going to fucking blow smoke.
Notification bell for updates, and make sure to tune in for our next episode, titled Just Business, where we take a closer look at just exactly what...
Okay, so we got Sun Microsystems, which is where he was before. I think Solaris was one of the original companies, probably with Calcomp, became Access, and then bought by Lockheed, which is a near devil.
John Ramsey's business, Access Graphics, did that got him over $1 billion in sales that year. And unfortunately may have been part of the reason this horrible crime occurred. So we'll see you on the next episode as we get one step closer to identifying the horrible monster responsible for this heinous crime.
Word. That was great. There's so much information in that like you don't find in the other stuff. That's the worst thing about this case is like, just like understanding 2020, there's so much information. You can't even try to explain it to people. And there's almost no way to simplify it at the same time. Was a product of Sun. There's no way to simplify this stuff to make it like more understandable in a small amount of time. That's what I'm hoping to do with the map, is to have a visual aid of the connections so that you can reduce the amount of work the brain has to do. I know, right? It's pretty funny. I do find there's a likelihood financially of the connection. I do think people that were involved are sophisticated, but not necessarily criminally experienced. I think the cops were inept to a degree that makes it hard to not see them as involved or culpable. Between the Gary Oliva tips and the neighbor stuff, all of this seems to have been ignored. And I haven't read like any of the police forms. So to me, the only understanding of what the police were doing comes either from the police, who make themselves sound bad every time you hear them, because like, what was the other book I read, or JonBenet
the problem with the book, every time they talk about what the cops were doing, it was legitimate. And every time they talk about what somebody else was doing, it was like mocked, dismissed, ridiculed. And you could just feel how biased the book was. He would say something that the cops did made sense, and then that somebody else did the exact same thing. It was nonsense. MIC went from 51 contractors down to 5 in just a few short years around this time, which I found to be quite relevant. What's MIC? Ah! Ferris. Fucking great ending. That's fucking brilliant. You're still here? Go. Fuck, I remember when this okay, this is how old I am. I saw this literally in the theater. Oh, military industrial complex. Yeah. You mean down to 5 as in huge consolidation. Because they bought them all up. I remember being in the theater and knowing that I was supposed to wait till after the credits because something happens. It's fucking hilarious.
You're still here? It's over.
It's fucking great.
Go home. Go.
Yeah, go home.
How do I still remember that? That's how many times I've seen that fucking movie. The consolidation era. Well, yeah, that's when they lifted a lot of restrictions, and antitrust was doing absolutely nothing. So we saw a lot of contraction. We saw it in the cell phone industry. We saw it in banking, real estate. Like there were a lot of industries where deregulation allowed them to do a lot of fucking shit. Okay, guys. This was fun. Murder Mondays. Obviously, I'll be back Thursday on Twitch because 9 p.m. Well, I don't know when Ramadan's over. When is Ramadan over? I think it was like the 16th. So there's probably one more week of Uninformed being at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. Eastern. That's my buddy Jungler and I. He's like, when it started, he's a righty. I'm kind of a lefty. At least I align with a lot of left-wing desires, just not ideology. But we'll definitely be back on Twitch for that Thursday. I doubt I'll be back before then, but possibly. If I get a wild hair up my ass, I'll do another YouTube stream. And yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys. We'll catch you guys on that other flip side. Hopefully my face will have excised its temporary resident. But yeah, get in touch with me, OneSolved, and hopefully you can help answer some questions as they come up. All right, yeah. Peace out. Oh, gotta hit that last button. There you go.